Well, who is going to win the election? That is the question on everybody's minds. And we know the answer. Well, Christian does. And we're going to make him tell us the answer. Now, I'm going to caveat some things up front so we don't have to listen to 47 caveats as we're going through this. So as long as everyone understands, here's the rules today. We're going to be looking at polling. We're going to be looking at betting markets. We're going to be looking at any number of things that could provide us a strong, let's say, inductive argument for who's going to win on November 5th. And we're going to require Christian to actually give us bold predictions. None of this like mealy-mouthed political crap. Well, there's a hard degree. No. Bold predictions. So when he resists this urge, because he is a very good analyst. In fact, some have even called him the Oracle of Virginia, and it was no one in this room. So I get it. He wants to be careful. So we're going to push him to make good predictions, right? We're going to push him to make bold predictions, but give the guy a break if things change over the next couple of weeks a little bit, okay? So just there we go. That caveat's out there. Plus, I got to tell you, one of my favorite pastimes lately has been watching JD Vance just take the press to the woodshed on a regular basis. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that because we had some debate on this show on whether or not JD Vance or Donald Trump or anybody else should even be talking to the mainstream media. And Christian and I had a little bit of a disagreement on this, and I'm going to prove to him why I was right and he was wrong. And he's gonna have to apologize to me live on air. Maybe, probably not. He's not going to do that. And then we're also going to talk about some other pretty interesting infographics that somebody sent us over, and we want to be able to get that out to everyone to be able to use as you see fit in order to demonstrate some of the differences between a Trump administration and, let's say, a Biden-Harris administration. So we're going to do all of that and more. Again, all of that. We're going to tell you who's going to win the election. You're welcome. So you can go out to the betting markets as soon as we're done here. All that and more coming up in this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates, but other than that, a reasonably good guy. With us in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Yes, I'm not the only one here today.
No, Tina isn't.
Oh my gosh,
We've
guys.
had so many people who are worried about Hamilton, and they're like, where is Hamilton, the good Hamilton? Is he okay? And
you guys are messing up my introduction
flow
right here.
We're so excited to have him with us today. I'm sorry I stepped all over that for you, but
I had this whole plan on how we were going to make sure that people knew he was there. I'm going to do it anyways. Next we have
I was about to say
our historian, political prognosticator, and dubbed on Twitter the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How you doing, Christian?
I got bad news for you. I'm about to derail this as well. I want to give a shout out to Peyton and McKinsey from Ohio, who became engaged this past weekend with Nick there.
At the Homesteaders of America conference.
Yeah, that's in Front Royal, Virginia. So that's now couple number 2. That I can now say that you have played at least some role in putting together.
we did have a great time at the Homesteaders of America conference. It was this past Friday and Saturday. Awesome turnout. We saw a ton of people there. A lot of people from our community were there. And yes, somebody asked me to kind of secretly help them arrange a proposal. And we managed to do that. Maybe
cute.
There might be more following that. I might get to post the video, but I'm only going to do so with their permission. But it was pretty funny. And then, back by popular demand, Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking, back in the studio, flanneled up, ready to talk.
He drove an entire state to be here.
Oh, well, we were at the Homesteaders of America conference, and a couple people asked me where I've been, and so I figured I'd come on today's show while I'm still in town before I head home, but it's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, good to see you. Get out. All right. So, look, you didn't want to live up here. You can leave, right? That's right. All right. So, again, getting into all of this, the first thing I want to go through has to do with talking a little bit specifically about JD Vance and some of the things he's done, because Christian and I did have something of a disagreement on this. I wouldn't say a disagreement. It's kind of a discussion about what is the appropriate strategy, because I've kind of had a policy over the last several years where I just don't really talk to the press much. It doesn't mean I never talk to them, but I'm not big on holding press conferences. I'm not big on reaching out to the press for comment. A lot of times I ignore the press when they reach out to me for comment. And the reason why is because it's not as if I started off this way. I used to talk to them all the time. I used to attend the press conferences. I used to do all of those things. And I remember one year in particular, 2018 was kind of a big moment. 2018, I gave a speech on the Second Amendment, and it was a 7-minute speech. I laid out this entire argument, and one of the things I said in there is I said, well, if we want to start talking about the crime, if we want to talk about gun violence, well, maybe it's time to start talking about broken homes and how government policy has actually increased or contributed to the increase in broken homes within our society, that ranges from everything from the sexual revolution to abortion policy. That was one little snippet of a 7-minute speech. And the reporter runs up to him right after and goes, did you just say that abortion causes gun violence? And I looked at him and I said, how in the hell did you even come up with that? Pardon me. How in the heck did you even come up with that, right? Like how was that, out of 7 minutes of me talking about this, how was that the thing you came away with? So I told him, no, that's not it at all. I listed out a very comprehensive argument. And the headline, I think it was in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. The headline was "Delegate Claims Abortion Leads to Gun Violence," and it was one of those moments where I said this was not something where somebody took creative license. This was not something where somebody was properly explaining what I said in context. I had another reporter that I had sat down with the Washington Post. She described it as a 7-minute screed. It wasn't even a speech, just a screed. That's not objective reporting, because neither one of these journalists were editorialists. They were just supposed to be objectively reporting on the goings-on in Richmond. And I saw this again and again. I saw it in my local hometown newspaper in Culpeper, Virginia, right, where we will vote for Donald Trump by probably 62%, right? Small town, rural, very conservative area. I saw my own local hometown paper deliberately misrepresent my position on things. There was one vote we had on red flag laws, and I listed all the constitutional reasons why I thought it was a bad idea, why I thought it would be counterproductive, why I thought it infringed on Second Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, First Amendment rights. And what did the press list it as? Delegate Freitas votes against anti-suicide bill. Oh, okay. It's just an anti-suicide bill. Yeah. So I say all of this in order to give the audience kind of a grounding for where I stand on this issue when it comes to talking to the press and the larger conversation that I had with Christian on it, and whether or not it's something that, because a lot of what the Trump campaign has done is actually bypassed the press and actually gone into some of the largest podcasts out there. And we're not just talking about conservative ones. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's going on some incredibly popular and very good, very well-run podcasts.
I think it's really smart of him. And I've been saying this for a while, that I think that legacy news media is dying very quickly. It's losing out to YouTube and X. I will tell you, I get on X to find out what's going on, and then the big news media outlets finally pick it up about 12 hours later. Yeah. And, so you won't know fully if it's vetted or not, but at least you're getting some rumblings of what's going on before they finally put their stamp on it. And one thing that I wanted to mention too, I think that's also happening in entertainment too, by the way.
No, yeah, it is.
But that speech that Nick mentioned, if the news media, what would you even call that? The establishment media had their way, no one ever would have known about that gun speech beyond it just being a screed or saying that
abortion leads to school shootings.
Because basically all they heard is a trigger word that addressed one of the sacraments of the leftist religion, which is abortion. Child sacrifice is very much still a thing for them. And so if we go to threaten their ability to, rip out the children in the womb, they all freak out and have a cow and then write news like that. And so, if Nick had not had a social media platform to put his speech in its entirety out there for the general public to actually know what he really said, everyone would have just thought that this is what happened.
Yeah, this
is one of the reasons why we bypass the mainstream media now. Because there is no point in even talking to them. Our viewership's so much higher than theirs anyway half the time. It's like Washington Post doesn't even keep up with the reach we can get. So anyway, all that to say, I think that Trump is doing an amazing thing by meeting with all of these different podcasts, going on them, and I do think it's really interesting that the only one I've seen Kamala go on is Call Her Daddy. Yeah. And it was just so fitting.
By the way, I do think Tina came up with a great slogan that is going to be probably a t-shirt or a mug, and that's Tina's idea for her, the Call Her Mommy. So yeah.
Yeah. What if I start a podcast called Call Her Mommy?
I love it.
And I'll talk about being a wife and mother.
Yeah,
and
dude, I love it. We that copyrighted, trademarked, whatever else. That's ours now. That's ours now. No. I think it's a great idea. Well, and the point is that's to Tina's point. That speech ended up getting up between all the platforms that shared about 100 million views.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it changed the entire dynamic. In fact, to this day, it is still the most popular speech on the House Democrats YouTube channel for the Virginia House of Delegates. They posted that speech on their YouTube thinking, oh, gosh, this is really going to make them look foolish.
And it's the highest viewed on their entire
highest
platform.
Liked, everything. So, again, it just shows the power here. But what I think is important is that it's not that someone's killing the mainstream media. Mainstream media is killing themselves by being blatantly dishonest and partisan. But you know who's never going to be dishonest with you about the facts? Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers doesn't lie about what it is that they provide you. They're very open. They're very honest. In fact, we've had Ben Spell on here several times. We've got to spend some time with his wife, Corley. I mean, they are just wonderful people, and we use Good Ranchers. And when I say we use Good Ranchers, I mean we eat a lot of Good Ranchers steak. It is absolutely awesome. So's their chicken. So's their pork. I mean, it's really good quality stuff. And what you need to understand is that if you go on right now, if you use the link in the description, if you use our promo code, goodranchers.com, promo code Nick, and you sign up for one of those subscriptions, not only are you going to get some of the best beef, pork, poultry, wild-caught seafood you've ever tasted delivered straight to your door, but they're going to give you a free add-on for the next 4 years. Right, you get to you can pick chicken breast, you can pick burger meat, you can pick all kinds of stuff. You can pick bacon, right, which again you can use to wrap all the other stuff. They're going to give it to you as a free add-on for 4 years. They're locking you into that. So let's imagine the worst happens and someone we don't want to be president becomes president, decides to just, I don't know, destroy the country through inflation, everything else. At least the meat coming to your door on a monthly basis is not only going to be good and quality. You're going to get that free add-on for 4 years. They're committing to you. They are promising you they're going to do something, and they're promising they're going to stand by it. So it's not just the quality. It's not just great price, because they're also going to give you $25 off that first order if you use my promo code, right? And express shipping. But they're going to give you an outstanding deal. And like I said, it's great people. It's a great way to not only support yourself through eating good, healthy, beef and pork that's raised here in the United States. You're helping a great company that really cares about their people and doesn't constantly want to insult your values. And then you're also helping this show, because that's the bottom line. Advertisers help make what we do here as possible. We are committed to only picking advertisers that we think have a great product and good values. So, hey, look, help all of us out, to include yourself. Go to goodranchers.com, use promo code
And
Nick.
Good Ranchers also listens to their customers, because they just made a huge announcement about chicken nuggets.
Chicken nuggets.
And Nick, I know you take a lot of pride in the chicken nuggets you make.
I make homemade
And so
chicken
I
nuggets.
think
He even makes the carnivore chicken nuggets for me. They're great.
So I think we need to order some of those chicken nuggets and stack them up against yours and see who wins.
Well,
Yeah,
we'll see.
we'll
We'll give it a go. All right. We got some clips here. We're going to go from JD Vance, because this goes back to what I was saying before, right? Like, should JD Vance, should Donald Trump even be wasting their time with the press? Now, I'm going to say this. Right off the bat, the reason why I've got a lot of JD Vance stuff on here is because the two people that I have seen handle the press the best on the right, and Donald Trump isn't one of them. I don't think he does a bad job with the press. I think he does a lot of stuff that's kind of funny. I think he calls them out sometimes in ways that are absolutely hysterical. But when it comes to just that instant recall with incredibly detailed rebuttals to things that the press is saying, the two best people I have seen on the right are Vivek Ramaswamy and JD Vance. And so we've got some receipts here. Let's go ahead and let's bring up this first one. I think it's just some tweets. And this is one, JD Vance proving to be an asset for the Trump campaign through media appearances, something the Harris campaign is completely avoiding. Here are 3 examples post-ABC debate. John Karl tries baiting Vance by talking about Trump's mean words about Harris. Vance turns it around and relates it to Kamala's proposals that make no sense. She repeats these ridiculous platitudes where if you actually think about what she said, you realize that it doesn't make any sense. So this is an important thing that a lot of conservatives actually screw up when talking with the press. The press a lot of times asks you baited questions, all right? In fact, if you want to know the reason why so many people are actually going to get information from podcasts like Joe Rogan, like Lex Friedman, like Chris Williamson, like Sean Ryan, a lot of times it's because when you see these guys ask questions, it's not because they haven't expressed some of their own ideas or opinions on various topics, but they're genuinely curious. when they ask you a question, it's because they really want to know what you think or what your ideas are or what helped you formulate those ideas, instead of basically conducting a bunch of baited ambushes where they are wording the question in such a way where they presuppose the answer, or they presuppose the facts or reality about something without actually just letting you speak. And you notice what JD Vance does when he gets confronted with something that, again, Vance turns it around and relates it to Kamala's proposals that make no sense. So, for instance, you could say, well, JD Vance isn't answering the question. Well, no, what he's doing is he's not accepting these kind of prepackaged, preconceived notions baked into the question. And he's also kind of showing the hypocrisy of the press when it's like, well, okay, if you're concerned about mean tweets, why aren't you concerned about this over here? Why is it every time Donald Trump gets or anybody gets asked a question about Donald Trump, it's always some mean tweet question? And then when it's Kamala Harris, it's always something like, gosh, is it difficult being this beautiful and intelligent and smart and wonderful and courageous? And so it's a great way to do that. Another one is Caitlin Collins brings up the Haitians eating animals story from Springfield. I think we might actually have we do have the video on that one, but there's actually a different one where it talks about the process that we're going to show you. But he goes, when Caitlin Collins brings up the Haitians eating animals story from Springfield, Vance flips it on the media for failing to investigate and then discusses the overall impact in Springfield from the migrants. So this was important too, because again, Collins is trying to, once again, it's not about the actual issue that is taking place in Springfield, Ohio. It's about the way Trump described it or what Trump said about it. And so by JD Vance, once again, not accepting the flawed premise, but he doesn't go straight past the flawed premise. He addresses it. He goes, here's your flawed premise. And not to mention the fact that the media's response to this, I thought, was incredible, because it was, well, we talked to the city manager and the city manager said that's not happening. I'm old enough to remember a time that one of the things the press, a free press, was there for was to question the government's narrative on something. Whereas now they only question the government's narrative if they don't like who's in office. If they like who's in office, it's almost like they see their job as providing top cover for them.
Well, and the media steps it up a notch, because the town manager said, we can't confirm these claims. Mm-hmm. Then the media says, they say it's not happening. Well, saying it can't be confirmed just yet does not mean it's not happening.
No, they'll say there is no evidence.
Yes.
When some city
Except
government
for all
official
the videos
says
everybody's seeing all over X, because X is the only one that doesn't rip everything down every time you post something. Okay,
so here's the question, Nick. How does Vance's ability to combat the media affect the presidential race, in your opinion? Because the counter argument here that I'm sure that some people in the chat or some listeners might say is, that's all well and good, but Vance is not at the top of the ticket, and traditionally vice presidential picks don't really move the needle that much in either direction. So even if he's a good debater, even if he's able to articulate his positions well, and even if he's able to dismantle the media, whenever they use their twisted framing to attack him or Trump, ultimately it's not really going to make a huge difference, because he's just running for vice president.
So I would think that here's why. There's a couple reasons why I think it's a little bit different this time. A lot of times, again, people will pick a vice presidential candidate. Sometimes it's because it's a governor in a state that you need to win or shore up your support in, or whatever else it might be. A lot of times people have picked vice presidents that probably, maybe unify the party. Maybe there's some division between the more conservative wing or the more moderate wing. So for instance, I think Donald Trump picked Mike Pence the first time around in large part because people like me were really skeptical of Donald Trump because of a lot of things he had done in his personal life. A lot of the values that I saw on display by him in his personal life did not reflect what I believed was appropriate or right. And I was really concerned on how that was going to impact his decision-making process. I was really concerned on whether or not he was going to stay true to certain values that, for me, he had only recently, came to any sort of conviction on. Whereas Mike Pence had a track record, right? He had been in the trenches. Now, again, I know there's a lot of different feelings about Mike Pence now, and I completely understand that. But I'm saying at the time in 2016, Mike Pence was seen as somebody that had fought for conservative values, had done it consistently, had lived it out in his own life. And so all of that was considered very, very valuable to a lot of people that were somewhat skeptical of Donald Trump. when it comes to this particular race, the reason why I think JD Vance is having more of an impact than your typical vice presidential candidate is, one, he is very, very good at this.
Yeah.
Right. Most of the vice presidential candidates have not been. Right. Like Dan Quayle was not a horrible guy, but he was a little bit of a gaffe machine, especially with the press that was, desperately trying to make him a gaffe machine. Joe Lieberman was not, again, he was not necessarily a galvanizing figure within the Democratic Party. And we can kind of go through the list on both Republican and Democrats where, okay, these guys were, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse, but who really cares? Two things with JD Vance. One, he's good at it. Two, Trump can't run again. And JD Vance is pretty young. I think he's 40, 41.
Yeah.
Very young for politics. And JD Vance, I think, has a similar worldview when it comes to policy mechanisms. He obviously has a very intriguing background, a very interesting background. He didn't come from wealth, didn't come from anything that could be described as privilege, none of it. And I think JD Vance is someone that a lot of people see as a potential successor. So, and you don't see that a lot with vice presidential candidates. So I think one of the things that you're actually seeing within this campaign that is, I think, very complimentary based off of the personalities, the backgrounds, the mechanisms in which they communicate, is Trump is spending his time where I think it has the most value, which is at rallies. Because dude crushes it at rallies. Yeah. Say what you want about Donald Trump, but that guy can draw a crowd and keep that crowd engaged because he doesn't go up there. I've seen him at a rally. He doesn't need the teleprompter, man.
In Pennsylvania, he started off right where he left off at the assassination
man, that was
attempt.
so
That was pretty epic.
Yeah. When he got up there and said, as I was saying,
right.
Oh, man, that was gangster.
Also, I love how the media likes to be like, well, he went on this rambling, meandering, 2-hour speech. And the thing about Trump is he will talk to you like you're just in his living room for 2 hours. That's what his speeches are kind of like.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was funny when he went on the Adam Schultz podcast and said, I don't ramble, I weave. And he starts talking about how it's something he does on purpose.
Yeah.
Well, for the first Biden-Trump debate, I was out of the country. We were in Israel. For the second Biden-Harris debate, Christian and I were in the UK, so I didn't get to watch either of those because of the time zone. I only saw highlights.
Well, I didn't like it. So.
But the Vance debate was the first one I was able to watch live. And what I heard after that from so many different people was, I wish these two people were running for president.
Both of them?
Vance and Walz instead of Trump and Kamala.
Just because of how civil they were, probably.
Right. And so the point I'm making is that I think that the vice presidential candidates have more weight in this election than they have over the past few elections.
Usually the vice presidential debates are kind of a nothing burger. It's kind of like watching the WNBA. It's like, I really want to see the NBA.
Right.
I'll watch the WNBA because it's on. And it's the same thing. Nobody cares about the girls playing basketball. No one usually cares about the VPs arguing over things. But in this situation, I mean, I feel like Pence delivered a pretty masterful
Pence?
You mean
sorry,
Vance?
not Pence.
Vance.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Vance.
Yeah.
Vance. Sorry, they're both one syllable. Vance. He really delivered quite a masterful performance.
He did a very good.
And just the fact that his facial expressions were so perfect. He was really. I feel like he was full-fledged in the moment. And he wasn't sitting here scribbling down whatever he's going to say next. He was in the moment and listening to what Walz was saying and operating on the fly. And the fact that he can do that, I only know one other person that could do something like that, and that's actually Nick. But I don't usually see that in politics, somebody that can take in what the other one's saying and then just know what
Turn
to
it
say
back
just
on them.
immediately. Yeah. And man, he was good. And I loved watching his face when he, when Walz was trying to talk about China and basically why he lied by talking about his whole life story.
Oh my God, that was the
and
most
Pence
absurd.
Vance was just like,
yeah.
What?
He did a lot of the Jim Halpert breaking the.
He broke the fourth wall a lot.
Yeah, he did. But it was timed well, right? He did it well. So go to this next one real quick. I want to show this too because this is another way that Vance actually.
Don't you just love ads?
I love the
go.
ads. All right, scroll down. because scroll down somewhere. I want to go down to where Vance is tweeting. All right, so right there. Because another thing that Vance does really well is that he does follow up with the receipts and he knows where to do it, right? Like he goes right onto X and he says, oh, here's this, here's this, here's this. Because there's a couple things. It's one thing to rattle everything off from the top of your head. It's another thing to show up with the receipts. Now, obviously, he can't really do that on stage, right? So the fact that he does follow up and then provide content that is very easy to share is really important. And on this one, as promised earlier tonight, here's Michelle Bowman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Given the current low inventory of affordable housing, the inflow of new immigrants to some geographic areas could result in upward pressure on rents. Now, the reason why I was bringing this up is because, again, going back to the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, as well as other locations as well, one of the big issues is that when you are flooding a relatively small community with a massive amount of immigrants, you're going to get into housing issues. It's not just the issues that you have of potential cultural clashes, from a small town, all of a sudden having a bunch of people that are from a very, very different culture and area and geography. It's also just the practical strain on existing resources, from schools to hospitals to law enforcement to housing to rent, everything. And again, the press does this thing, and it reminds me of a scene from Yellowstone. If you've ever seen the series Yellowstone, where Kevin Costner is, the governor of Montana now, and he walks into his advisors, and they're talking about, bringing in a bunch of solar panels. And he goes, well, what's that going to do to the sage? Because you got to remove all the sagebrush. And they're having this discussion about it. And the guy goes, well, there's no studies showing that, these solar panels will have any impact on the sage. And he goes, what do you do when you put in solar panels? Well, you clear off all of the ground and the brush and whatnot. And you put them in. He goes, okay, where do you think they live? Where do you think the sage? Forgive me, I'm forgetting what it was. The grouse or the quail or whatnot. Where do you think they live? Well, they live in the sage. So what impact do you think it's going to have? Well, there's no studies showing. He goes, you're fired. He goes, I don't think you're a bad guy, but I think it's ridiculous in the fact that you believe it. And that's what happens here. Right, the press will come on. JD Vance will say something like, this is going to have a negative impact with respect to housing costs, or this is going to have a negative impact with respect to the strain on existing services. And the press will say something like, there's no study which show. Okay, let me see if we can figure this out without an expert or a professional study. You have services and housing which is used to accommodating a certain number of people with perhaps a 2 to 5% increase in population over time. And then practically overnight, you add thousands of new people to that equation. Do you think that could not to mention the fact that you're adding thousands of people that are in no way, shape, or form familiar or any way integrated within the society in which you have added them? And you're going to tell me I need to cite a study to tell you that that's probably going to be a strain on sources? But JD Vance is like, okay, cool. Next day he shows up. Here it is, right here from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. So it's not like he went to Heritage Foundation, right, or the Mises Institute. He went right to, what should be a respected site and said, see, are you happy now? Do you now acknowledge that this could potentially be a problem? And this is another thing that I think JD Vance does really well. He doesn't just do well on the stage, he does the follow-up. Because what JD Vance knows, and what I think a lot of other candidates fail to recognize sometimes, is that so much of the debate is going on within social media. And X especially is where more and more people go to get their news. It's fascinating to me that, I will see someone say, well, where did you get that? Well, I got it on X. Oh, well, are you serious right now? Do you realize that pretty much everybody under the age of 50 is probably going to X first to see the headlines or to see the news or to see commentary or to see analysis of something? Or do you not get that? And the answer is, for some of them, no. JD Vance gets it.
Yep.
Let's go on.
I love this. One of the things this reminds me of, I just got to insert this. There was a time decades ago when they suddenly discovered direct mailing works. Well, I feel like we're in that, the same way that discovery of direct mailing the voters caused them to realize, oh, we can actually change minds if we mail things to them directly. I feel like we're in a new era of that type of discovery with social media and all these other platforms that can be used, which is one of the reasons it's so important not to censor. The censorship is dangerous in that situation because you can't have a free flow of information. And this election, unlike the last couple of elections, we actually have a platform now that by default is completely wide open. And, say what you will about maybe you're hearing something that maybe isn't true or whatever. Well, ultimately, we're watching all kinds of crap that's not true on legacy media anyway. So, to offset it, let's let people make their own decision. If you hear something that's a little bit crazy on X,
well, can I say
view
this
it with
too?
a little bit of skepticism, because like right now there are some rumors about walls all over X that none of us know if these are true. I don't know if these are solid accounts or not. And we can decide for ourselves if that's true. It puts it on our radar in case something does come out. But just the fact that this election, we have so much more freedom of information than we had in the last two, I think it's making a huge difference.
Well, Sean Ryan, too, he recently got on, I think I saw it on Instagram, and he was talking about, or it might have been Twitter, he got on there, he said, look, he goes, I reported something on my show the other day where we were talking about Kamala Harris taking a picture in front of an aircraft loaded with supplies that never took off and never got to the people. That was, he goes, that came from somebody that was actually involved with the whole process. That came from somebody that was actually in the military. He goes, I had another crew chief contact me and say that's not actually accurate. Those supplies did end up getting out to the people that needed them. They needed to be transferred to another plane, though. And so Sean went back and checked it out. And then he went right on Twitter. He said, look, we reported this. We had thought we had properly vetted it. It turned out to be wrong, that what Kamala Harris took the picture in front of when she was talking about, turns out those supplies did get to hurricane victims. And he goes, the reason I'm telling you this is because if I'm not willing to come and tell you when we got something wrong, or when we were even misled and reported it as fact, then I'm no better than the legacy media. And that's one of the reasons why people respect guys like Sean Ryan so much, is that when he gets it wrong, he will come back and tell you, we reported this, it ended up being wrong. I want you to know about it. He doesn't put it on he didn't do like a little tweet on, or the page 7 retraction. No,
Yeah, that's how the news media does it.
Yes, he went right out there and wanted to do it on a series of platforms so that everybody would know, because it was important to him that he can be trusted, not simply because he might agree with your particular values or he might want the same election outcome, but because he's committed to the truth first. Right? And we have lost so much of that with the mainstream media. Here's a perfect example of this. Let's go ahead and play this clip. I think it's a clip. If it's not,
is it this one?
Yeah.
That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting
Okay,
for
pause.
10 years.
Thank you, Senator.
I'm going to give everyone context here that's watching or listening to this. So what's going on right now, this is the portion where, again, they're talking about illegal immigration. They're talking about the Haitian migrants coming into Springfield, Ohio, and the press is about to basically, stop him and say that they're fact checking him on air. And a lot of the left came out and said, oh, JD Vance is afraid of being fact checked. No, we're afraid of what the press calls fact checking, which in reality is manipulation of information and then only goes in one direction. They never seem to, quote, fact check the other side. Is that because Kamala Harris and Tim Walz don't say things that aren't true? No, I don't think so. Tim Walz spent a lot of time saying things that weren't true. So anyways, I wanted to give you that backdrop because this exchange is important. Go ahead.
Of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
we
CBP
want to have.
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, you're.
All right, pause right there.
The
See what they
audience
did? They
can't hear
cut
you
off
because you're.
They cut off his mic. So what happened was they
But he did keep talking, and people could still hear him, though.
they did, but what was
even though she said they couldn't.
The way that this kind of transpired is that he was talking about problems of illegal immigration. They were pointing out that these are legal immigrants. And then he went on to explain, he's like, wait a second. This was a process that was essentially created out of whole cloth by the Biden-Harris administration, where it allowed for people without proper vetting whatsoever to come into the country and come into the country under these conditions. And the reporter kind of like snarkily said, oh, thank you for explaining the legal process. And this is the problem, right? If you were to ask people what the asylum process is for the United States, what is it to come to the United States? And I were to tell you that, you claim asylum status, and then taxpayers pay to fly you into the central portion of the United States, in this case, Ohio, and set you up without any other vetting. You would look at that and be like, that's insanity.
Yeah.
That can't be the way it really runs. Yes, it is. But instead of the press actually informing people that your immigration process in the United States under the Biden-Harris administration looks nothing like what you probably think it looks like, instead of doing that, they do, well, technically it's legal. They made it legal, so it's legal.
Well, the left is really into creating laws to either turn you into a felon immediately overnight or make you legal immediately overnight. Like they do it with the wave of their magic wand. It's kind of like that time here in Virginia where we had that Democrat that was basically making most of the magazines people have in their guns illegal, and it would cause them to have a felony for every single one that they owned. And Nick got up and said something about, you're turning law-abiding citizens into felons overnight. And they said, well, no, law-abiding citizens would be affected. Meaning if they turned their stuff in and they just followed the new law, they wouldn't be affected. And if they didn't follow the law, then they're a felon. So that's how they do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's one of those technically true things, right? Technically true things. What I'm saying is, like, you are punishing like otherwise law-abiding citizens. No law-abiding citizen would be impacted by this. And I even told him, I said, oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that a nice way to put it? Right? Yeah, that thing you've been able to legally do all the way up to this point, we're going to take that away from you. And if you don't comply by handing over your property, we're going to punish you. And the way he originally drafted that bill, we're going to punish you, we're going to potentially imprison you, and we're going to take away your voting rights. Like, oh, isn't that convenient? Eliminating the voting rights of thousands of gun owners if they don't want to hand over their property to the government. And then you having the audacity to say no law-abiding citizen would be impacted.
Well,
that's the sort
they're
of
a
crap that's going
felon.
on.
They lose their gun rights and their voting rights.
All right, we got one more that we're going to hit on here with JD Vance, and this is probably my favorite. This is probably my favorite exchange that he's had with somebody. And to give you an idea, again, this goes into this whole question of the Venezuelan gangs in Colorado.
Taking over apartment complexes.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything more because I want to let him do the talking because he does a great job. This is I think it's a couple minutes. Go ahead.
Oh, I just forgot that I had muted us.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
Understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened. Martha. I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up.
Pause that right now. Oh my God,
that's incredible! And somehow, you know what this reminds me of? This always happens. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the GOP or Republican response to whatever the problem is. That's what the media will always focus on whenever there's any sort of problem that pops up. And I'm looking at some of the comments beneath, especially for our audio listeners. I'm looking at some of the comments down here, and somebody says but it was only 5 apartment complexes, and they posted the clown emoji. No, you're right. The mainstream media is incredibly pathetic. This wasn't a systemic problem. It only happened to 5 apartment complexes.
Well, hold on. I want to drill down on that for just a second. Think about all the apartment complexes of. How many people are housed in those apartment complexes? So even if it was only 5 apartment complexes, how many hundreds of people then are affected by that? We've lived in apartments when we were younger that had thousands of people in the complex. We've lived in others that had hundreds, but typically it's you're talking hundreds of people per apartment complex most of the time.
Well, I want to look to...
And so that's a lot of American lives being affected by these gangs taking things over. Let's not pretend that's little.
Well, and let's... I want to look at kind of the mechanic of the fact checking that she's doing here, right? So her big problem with Donald Trump was Donald Trump apparently said something like the city's being taken over by Venezuelan gangs. So again, what is she arguing with? She's arguing with the preciseness of his statement, okay? And so what did she say? She then say the mayor completely denies this, or something along those lines, right?
Flat out
denies it. And JD Vance said, well, no, what he said is that it's exaggerated. Well, grossly exaggerated. Okay. You're upset. You're so upset with Trump's preciseness of language, right? You apparently don't care about the fact that there are, in fact, reports of Venezuelan gangs taking over multiple complexes, right? You're more concerned about the preciseness of language. Fine. You just screwed up on your own standard of the preciseness of language by saying that the mayor flat out denies it. Well, he doesn't flat out deny it. Oh, okay. Well, and then she goes back and what does she say? The first time she says it, she says, well, we reached out and the mayor said it was a handful of apartment complexes, right? Think about that. A handful of apartment complexes. And then when she re-engages with Vance, she goes, well, what do you say that when it's only a handful of complaints? Okay, do you see what she did there? She changed it from a handful of complexes to a handful of complaints. And I think in part because she knew how bad that actually sounded. If you say a handful of complaints, well, that could be 3 or 4 people in the same complex. If you say 4 or 5 different complexes, that's huge. You have a widespread problem that's taking place right now. It's bad enough if it's one, but the fact that it's multiple. So by her own standard of, I don't like the fact that Donald Trump is so imprecise when he talks about the fact that Venezuelan gangs are taking over apartment complexes in Colorado, USA. I'm really upset by that. That's something we need to spend a lot of time discussing. And then she couldn't even be precise in her own language. She fails her own standard for fact checking. And this is part of the things that people have gotten tired of.
Yeah.
And JD Vance handled this perfectly because instead of just saying, well, I disagree and here's why, it was like, are you listening to yourself right now? And that is so, because so many Americans are feeling just that. So many Americans are looking at the press completely ignoring the larger issue and getting mad at Donald Trump because the statistic was off by whatever it was.
And then when he tries to refute anything, immediately with the arrogance, they immediately go in there with the arrogance. Well, I know exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And then she says something that is totally fake, not true. I'm definitely to the point where I'm going, no wonder Donald Trump called them fake news, because they really are. They are liars.
Well,
and for some reason, they're allowed to still operate as trusted news sources. They should have their licenses revoked for the amount of lies that they have put forward to the American people. I mean, I would venture to say that there are plenty of lies that the news media perpetuated that probably cost people lives, especially during COVID and things like that. So I'm just to the point where these people are culpable, and this actually is a big deal. It's not just they're saying untrue words. They are pushing with an element of authority that we're where you go to get the truth.
Yeah.
And,
we're the
and
ones
everybody else is probably misleading you. So we're going to tell you the truth. And then they lie to your face.
Yeah, we're the ones that rigorously analyze all of the reports to ensure that you don't get misinformation or disinformation. And again, to your point too, I know exactly what happened. Oh, really? Because you were there? Because you visited? Because you actually talked to the people that made these complaints? No, you know exactly what happened because a government official told you something. Again, I'm old enough to remember when the press used to have a little bit more of a universal skepticism for whatever government officials said. Again, the whole reason why we need a free press is so that they can actually be watchdogs of the people in power, not simply cozy up to them and regurgitate whatever they say as if, nope, that's the only thing that can possibly be true. Whatever the mayor said. Gosh, let me see. Does the mayor have any, I don't know, incentive to potentially downplay this issue?
Oh, yeah.
Gee, could he actually have an incentive structure that works that way? Might it be appropriate for the press to be a little bit more inquisitive of somebody that might have a perverse incentive? Apparently not. Not if it coincides with whatever their ideological objectives are. The political objectives of this reporter is clearly to assist Kamala Harris, which I get it, needs all the help she can possibly get. But when you do it this way, and when you do it this way against JD Vance, you end up looking like an idiot. So my whole thing is we're gonna get into part 2 here, where we're gonna talk about, okay, great, maybe they're mean to everybody, right? Maybe they just rigorously impose this on everyone. I am gonna say though, I stand by what I said before. If you are really, really good at having this sort of interaction with the press, if you're someone that can really call them out on what they're saying right there live on air, and then your team is actually willing to go ahead and follow up on social media and other places where you can show the receipts, do it. Because I love seeing that credibility, get crushed. Now again, there's going to be a lot of people who say they don't have any credibility anymore. I'm going to tell you right now, if they had zero credibility, they wouldn't have a show. They do have some credibility, and they have some people that are still willing to listen to it. But to the extent that you have somebody, and I know people like this, where, again, they grew up watching the news. This is just part of the thing. Yeah, the news doesn't always get it right. Yeah, the news might be a little bit biased, but on the whole, they're giving me good information. JD Vance doing stuff like this is showing people just how bad it has gotten within the media, because to some degree, that assumption used to be correct. There was enough of a competition within media to where if you weren't telling the truth, another agency would tell the truth, and you were going to look foolish and potentially lose market share or whatever else it was. They've been so infiltrated. And a lot of that goes back to our schools of journalism and higher ed. There's not a lot of journalism departments within American higher ed that aren't dedicated to a very woke, progressive worldview.
And it's one of the reasons why there are such huge numbers of us that don't trust them anymore. And now when we see something on Twitter that may or may not be true, our knee-jerk reaction is it's probably just being hidden, covered up by the legacy media.
Well, just to show it, let's go ahead and go to some clips here. I love this one. This was so blatant. I think it's also wonderful that Donald Trump has gotten so good at taking like ridiculous statements made by Kamala Harris or Walz, or
the most recent was Bill Clinton.
Or Bill Clinton. Like, they will say something where they are pretty much owning themselves, and then at the very end of it, just says, "I'm Donald Trump and I approve this."
I love it.
It is his troll messaging is on point. So this was something that came out. I don't know if we have the clip for it, but so 60 Minutes, was it 60 Minutes? CBS did an interview with Kamala Harris. And CBS is facing calls to release an unedited copy of the Harris interview after the network aired a lengthy response the vice president gave to a 60 Minutes correspondent about Israel to promote its lengthy sit-down. Harris's meandering answer, that first aired on the Sunday show Face the Nation, didn't make the version that aired on a special Monday edition of 60 Minutes. A shorter, more focused answer to the same question was shown instead. You can go on Twitter. I don't know if we have it. Go and scroll up, see if that can we actually play that clip?
Is it this?
Yeah,
one?
yeah, it's that one.
Question is, do we have an important...
Yeah.
Sorry. Here we go.
Yeah, you know how they...
It seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Do we have a real close ally?
What did she say?
The movement that we have done has been unburdened by the
passage of time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh my
Remember
gosh.
that one?
Yeah, and then they I think they have the next one. Go ahead and see if it goes forward. I want to see if they have
Just hit play again. I think it's there.
Okay.
In Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We are not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
Okay, pause right there. That's what they clipped. So that long meandering answer, like, we have made movements that have moved things to affect movements. Like that whole thing, that got edited out. And just that last answer she gave right there, like, we have, let them know that, this war needs to end, blah, blah, blah. That little short clip, that's what actually made it into the larger interview. Now, here's the question I want to ask. Can anyone imagine them selectively editing something the same way for Donald Trump. Of
No
course
way.
not, right? Of course not. We don't expect them to.
But she exists within the context of all that is, and within that interview and the powers that be that control the editing materials.
That editor didn't just fall out of the coconut tree yesterday. All right, go ahead. Let's look at the Trump debate fact checks. All right, we got an article here. With fact checks like these, how does truth stand a chance? This is from Jonathan Turley from The Hill. Go ahead and scroll down. You are entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts. That famous line from Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan remains a virtual mantra for politicians and pundits. Yet, judging from the presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, we have officially entered the post-truth political era. ABC News has been widely criticized for the bias of the two moderators, Lindsay Davis and David Muir. Even liberal outlets acknowledge that the two journalists seem inclined to fact-check only Trump. In the meantime, they allowed clearly false statements from Harris to go unchallenged. 3 of the unchecked claims are being widely disseminated by supporters, including some in the media. Here are 3 legal facts that are being repeated despite being clearly untrue. And so what we're going to go through right here is, again, if you remember the Trump debate between Trump and Harris, I would say right now, not Trump's finest performance. I think everyone acknowledges that.
No, I wasn't happy with
I'm
it.
glad I didn't see it. I was on the edge of the world with Hamilton and Isle of Skye when it was
Trump did not have a good debate.
That was the first time I actually was afraid for our chances in this election.
Mm-hmm. Well, because Kamala Harris actually did far better. Again, this is one of those things that when you're strategically thinking about debates, you're thinking about them not just from the perspective of being able to talk to people or be able to answer questions or your performance. You're also thinking about what's going to be the performance of the other person. Who does this help? What are the odds that I'm actually going to get fair questions? Trump went into this knowing the 2 reporters were going to come after him. All right, we can't give him a pass on that. He knew that it was going to be a hostile environment, regardless of what they might have told him ahead of time. And he definitely should have gone into it knowing that they were going to go easy on Kamala Harris. And that if Kamala Harris's debate team or debate prep team did anything, it would have been, do not go off script. These are the things you say. Right? That's it. Don't go off script. The few times I think she tried to go a little bit off, like one time she said, I want to encourage you to attend a Trump rally because what you're going to find is they go too long and people leave early. The dumbest thing she could have told people was to go attend a Trump rally. Dumbest thing she could have told people.
Yeah, but she did that because she wanted to troll him and she knows that attacking his Trump's weakness is
ego.
Like when she criticizes that type of stuff, what she's trying to do is get a rise out of him and then get him off script, because then he'll spend 5 minutes defending, well, my rallies are great and everybody.
And that's exactly what he did. He took the bait every single time. And so I'm glad he did not agree to a second one, because when it's all stacked up against you the way it is, and they're never going to call the left out on their lies, and they will call you out on splitting hairs. You know, the information you're putting out there is true, but they can find one little nitnoid of, oh, you communicated this slightly the wrong way. So we're going to say the whole thing's not true.
Well, we have, but there was a couple, and here was the part where if the press wanted to maintain any standard of credibility, this would have been their opportunity. And honestly, it's fascinating to me that the press doesn't look at this as a potential opportunity, because look at it from the mindset of the press, right? The objective of the press, let's say they do want to help Kamala Harris. I think that's absolutely true of these guys, to be sure. I mean, ABC definitely wanted to help Kamala Harris, but they want to maintain some level of credibility. Okay, how do you do that? Well, the way you would do it is you would pick a couple of softball things that you could fact check Kamala Harris on, right? Nothing too bad, but you would just, you throw something. They could not bring themselves to do it. And it's not as if they didn't have opportunities. And here's the 3 that were mentioned. One is crime is down under the Biden-Harris administration. This was so comical, in part because the FBI was not including numbers from places like Los Angeles. Like, I think it was New York City was another one that might not have been included, but
they cooked the books. I thought Chicago was.
It's right here. Harris and her allies have been repeating the claim by ABC, but the actual statistics show that Trump was right. The Justice Department's released survey found that under the Biden administration, there has been a significant increase in crime. Violent crime was up 37% from 2020 to 2023. Rape is up 42%. Robbery is up 63%. And stranger violence is up 61%. Stranger violence. That's an important one, because because there's a lot of violence, especially when you look at things like certain things with domestic violence, certain forms of theft and whatnot, where it's not a stranger. But when you import millions of new people into the country, other reports had shown startlingly increasing, such as a doubling of carjacking in D.C. since 2023. Again, when the FBI puts out certain reports and they're not actually incorporating crime stats from some of the worst places in the country, obviously that's going to impact it. And that was something that you can't just get away with saying, oh, well, no, she's right. The FBI said so. All right, the next one was Harris has not supported transgender operations for undocumented migrants. Some of the greatest mocking in the media concerned Trump's statement that Harris has supported transgender conversion treatment for undocumented persons. New Yorker staff writer Susan Glasser immediately wrote, "What the hell is he talking about? No one knows," which was, of course, exactly Harris's point. On CNN, Wolf Blitzer declared how outlandish it was for Trump to make such a claim. But here's the thing. It's true. Scroll down. In 2019, Harris told the ACLU that she not only supported such operations, but actively worked for at least one such procedure to take place when it was reported by Andrew Kazin on CNN. Host Aaron Burnett was gobsmacked by the notion of taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants. She actually supported that, Burnett exclaimed. Even the New York Times later admitted that the wildest-sounding attack line from Trump was basically true. Now, here's what I want to know. Did all the people that said, what the hell is he talking about? Are they all coming back now and going, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That's a bad policy. No, they're the same people that'll come back and be like, well, here's why it's actually a good thing to give transgender operations to people in jail for murder.
It's not about the truth for them. It's about damage control. Mm-hmm. They don't care if it's real. They don't care if they are telling a flat out lie. As long as they can push it out there hard enough and mock you enough to where you slightly let go of it. And that way they can continue to deceive their own gullible people. Because there's a lot of us that we saw right through it. But there's a really big swath of people that will believe anything they feed them.
Yeah.
Anything the news media feeds them.
And then the third one we want to hit is Harris does not support the right to abortion in the final 3 months of a pregnancy. Trump also hit Harris on her no limits position on abortion rights, allowing women the right to abort a baby up to the moment of birth. Trump said Harris supports laws allowing abortions in the 7th month, the 8th month, and the 9th month, to which Harris retorted, come on, no, and that's not true. I cannot tell you how many times I have experienced this when I am informing people on what bills Democrats are carrying in the Virginia legislature. We even had one that made it was national attention. Like, I was sitting there as Vice President Mike Pence called up Delegate Todd Gilbert, who at the time had chaired, I think it was the Courts of Justice Committee, where we had a Democrat come up and explain what her bill would do. And Delegate Todd Gilbert said, he was trying to understand what it would allow for. And he goes, so this would allow it all the way up to the point of birth. And she's kind of hem-hawing around the whole thing. And he goes, okay, let me be specific. All right. If a doctor decides, doesn't have to be, medical necessity, doesn't have to be, the woman's life is in danger, nothing like that. Right. Right. And then he said, and she started to think about it because she's trying to formulate, how do I answer this question without exposing the fact that, yes, this is what I want, abortion up to the point of birth. And as she's sitting there, he goes, she's dilating. Can she still have an abortion? And you see the delegate go, and then try to work away, and she can't. The answer is, yep. Yes, she could. There is no, please understand this, because I am almost certain that next year in Virginia, we are going to have a constitutional ballot amendment. They're going to, well, not next year. They're going to put it on the 2025 session. Democrats are going to offer up to the people of Virginia a constitutional amendment that will allow for abortion all the way up to the point of birth. And they're going to say, this is only for extreme cases. Oh, okay. Where in the language does it say only for extreme cases? Well, nobody uses it except for extreme cases. Well, that's not true. So you're allowing for it. Because you could put a caveat in there. If you really have a problem with this, then what you could say is only for issues like life of the mother, or only for issues where the baby can't possibly survive out of the womb. You could do things like that, but you don't want it, because what you want is if a mother finds out that maybe there's a high degree of probability that their child has Down syndrome, but they don't find that out until later in the pregnancy, you want her to be able to abort the child. That's what this comes down to. That is your position. Now, it doesn't matter that you hope that doesn't happen. It doesn't matter that you don't think that'll happen a lot. Nobody's saying it does happen a lot. How many babies have to be killed in the third trimester for you to say, yeah, that's probably not appropriate?
Yeah, and you would think this day and age, we've got plenty of abortion survivors walking around amongst us, and the left wants to pretend they don't exist. They want to pretend there's not a face to go with this.
Yeah.
You know, they want to spit on the ground and tell you that's DNA, right?
Well, I will tell you this much. When I carried the Born Alive Act, which was basically just saying, hey, doctor, if the baby is born despite the fact that you tried to abort the child, you owe it the same reasonable level of care that you would give any other patient within those circumstances. Now, this does not take away the mother's or the parent's right for DNR, which is do not resuscitate. Right? But it did say that the doctor can be held criminally liable if they allow that baby to just die as a result of a botched abortion. I couldn't get one Democrat to vote for it. In fact, we even offered a compromise. We even said, look, if you think the criminal penalty for allowing a baby to die on the table is too much, what would you accept? The answer is nothing. And if that wasn't bad enough, I had people testifying who had been the sort of people that had gone through botched abortions. One of them was 3 saline abortions. A saline abortion is one that essentially burns the child both externally and internally. That's what it does. And they had survived it. We talked to other abortion survivors where they were talking about situations where, thank God, a nurse had been there that wouldn't let the baby die.
There's others that are missing limbs. We
had Governor Ralph Northam as a pediatric surgeon said, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The child would be born, the child would be made comfortable, and then a conversation would ensue on what would happen next. Here's what it needs to understand. Whether or not it happens once or 500 times or whatever it is, please explain to me why we shouldn't make that a criminal offense. And again, we were even willing to compromise, but they didn't want it. And I watched as abortion providers and their lobbyists got up there and basically said, this doesn't exist. This is just about stigmatizing abortionists, abortion doctors, abortion providers. And it's like, you just heard a woman speak about it. She has all the documentation to prove it. You don't get to tell me that woman doesn't exist. But there we were. And that's what Kamala did. And again, the press, here would have been a really softball way that they could have fact-checked her. They would have been, well, Vice President Kamala Harris, is it true that you support a woman's right to choose through all 9 months of pregnancy? Right? They could have done that, and at least it would have said, well, no, you do actually believe that, but here we're going to give you a way to caveat it, or we're going to give you your multiple choice answer, and you can answer the one that you think does you the least political damage. But no, they didn't. ABC could not even convince themselves to do the most basic level of fact checking on obvious, verifiable lies. And the one that isn't mentioned on here too is there were nice people on both sides about Charlottesville. Yeah. If you go back and just watch the unedited clip of what Donald Trump said, he clearly denigrated anybody that was there with racist motivations. But if people actually remember what was going on at that time in Virginia, there was a big debate over historical monuments. Right? And so there were people that were saying, no, we don't want the Robert E. Lee monument taken down. They weren't doing it because of racist reasons. Some of them had historical reasons. But it didn't matter. There was no distinction. And Trump was saying, if you were a racist, you're over here in this other category. But there was other people there that were protesting on either sides of issue with respect to a monument, and I'm going to acknowledge that. But instead it was like, no, there were nice people on both sides. Even Snopes, which is a very left-wing fact-checking site, came out and said, yeah, this is not true. This is blatantly false. Trump did not say this. She repeated it on stage, and not one of those reporters said, well, it has been demonstrated that was not what he said.
And leftists are still repeating it. They still haven't pulled that one back.
Yeah, let's look at this other one too that I think is this one's interesting. And again, what we're demonstrating here is that JD Vance has done a very good job of dealing with this so-called fact-checking going on by the media. And exposing it for what it is. But we're also demonstrating here that the other side of the media is not doing, again, if they were doing this to both sides, you could at least say, okay, they're equal opportunity, fact checkers. But they're not. They're only doing it on one side. And then I came across this, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, how Google interferes with its search algorithms and changes your results. This was put out in 2019.
You talk about this quite a lot on the podcast itself. Occasionally, like, in passing, you'll be like, oh, I'm trying to find this thing, but instead Google will be like, did you mean the exact opposite of this thing?
Yes.
So this is, we all know that this is happening, but you actually found an article where it explained how it's, and confirming that it's happening.
Yeah, the authors for this, we have this, again, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. There's also a Wall Street Journal article on it, but just go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. I want to show how some of this operates. So Google made algorithmic changes to its search results that favor big businesses over small ones. In at least one case, made changes on behalf of a major advertiser, eBay, contrary to its public position that it never takes that type of action. The company also boosts some major websites such as Amazon and Facebook. Okay, maybe you can make some argument for that, but again, what Google needs to then do is say, this is what we do. Google engineers regularly makes behind-the-scenes adjustments to other information the company is increasingly layering on top of its basic search results. These features include autocomplete suggestions, boxes called knowledge panels, and featured snippets and news results, which aren't subject to the same company policies limiting what engineers can remove or change. This one right here is significant because, and you saw people demonstrating this on Twitter where they would type something into the Google search bar and it would say, basically, do you mean this? It's prompting you to ask the question a certain way, and it's prompting you toward a certain style of information. Because I can't tell you how many times I will put something into Google where I am obviously looking for a misstatement that Kamala Harris made or a claim that Tim Walz made that is false, and that's where I'm looking for. And it will give me 7 articles, 10 articles up front, basically trying to refute it or trying to say no, it's different, all from the left-wing perspective, right? We're not talking about facts versus not facts. We're talking about I am looking for something, and they are insisting that I first see a left-wing perspective on whatever it is that I'm looking for. And that's what people are getting tired of. And Google wants to repeal, oh, we don't do that. We just see right there. Again, Google engineers regularly make behind-the-scenes adjustments to other information the company is increasingly layering on top of its basic search result. And again, which are not subject to the same company policies limiting what engineers can remove or change. They have found a workaround, and they are using it. And then there's other ones. Despite publicly denying doing so, Google keeps blacklists to remove certain sites or prevent others from surfacing in certain types of results. These moves are separate from those that block sites as required by U.S. or foreign law, such as those featuring child abuse or copyright infringement, and from changes designed to demote spam sites, which attempt to gain this system to appear higher in results. So once again, right, they are blacklisting people. This is not a right-wing conspiracy theory. In autocomplete, the feature that predicts search terms as the user types a query, Google engineers have created algorithms and blacklists to weed out more incendiary suggestions for controversial subjects. Again, who gets to decide what's more incendiary and who gets to decide what's controversial? Google employees and executives, including co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, have disagreed on how much to intervene on search results and to what extent. Employees can push for revisions in specific search results, including on topics such as vaccinations and autism. So once again, who does? Employees. Employees can push for this stuff. What about the people using it? Right? So keep in mind, this is once again not we have an algorithm and we're just going to push stuff out. It's we're going to put our finger on the scale. Now, here's my question for you. How many conservatives do you think work at Google? How many of those Google employees are actually expressing any sort of concerns from a conservative perspective? In fact, we know that there aren't many, in part because the few that have been brave enough to stand up sometimes get fired or punished. And then finally, to evaluate its search results, Google employs thousands of low-paid contractors whose purpose, the company says, is to assess the quality of the algorithm's rankings. Even so, contractors said Google gave feedback to these workers to convey what it considered to be the correct ranking of results, and they revised their assessments accordingly. According to contractors interviewed by the Journal, the contractors' collective evaluations are then used to adjust algorithms. So it's, oh, no, we use these independent contractors in order to provide feedback. But then you give them criteria for which to give you feedback. That's cooking the books. Right? So do you think they're cooking the books in a conservative's favor?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We didn't ultimately need a paper to tell us something that we see on a daily basis because, like, anybody that uses Google that's on the right knows that this is all true, right? They didn't need a study to confirm it. Look at the donations that come from Google employees and where they go in terms of political candidates. It's something like over 90% of them go to Democrats. That, honestly, more than any study or paper, I believe the study and paper, right? But like that more than anything else already kind of told me that, like, oh yeah, of course they have a bias. When something like this pops up, all that this really does is confirm that which I kind of already had a very deep suspicion of. You know what I mean? So, like, honestly, we're getting to a point now where you're just going to have parallel systems start popping up where, you know, the right's going to realize that, and we've talked about this at length, like the right realizes that a lot of these institutions have been hijacked. There's no taking them back. And so you just ignore them. Yeah. But that kind of gets back to the original, like, debate that you and I had over, like, strategy and how to deal with these things. I still firmly believe, and I have not changed my mind on this, that we should not be loaning our credibility to outlets that hate us. CBS hates us. ABC News hates us. CNN hates us. The, you know, Washington Post, New York Times, they all hate us. Yeah. Mainstream media as an institution hates us. And when we go on there, when we give them quotes, when we give them debate coverage, first off, they're making money off of it. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be enriching my enemies. I want to be bankrupting my enemies. Second off, I'm serious about that. Oh, no, I get it. Second off, we're loaning them our credibility. When we go on, they can say, see, look, we got both candidates up here. We're taking quotes from both sides. We're interviewing both sides. I don't want them to be able to claim that. I want it to be as explicit as possible that they're left-wing hacks because they're left-wing hacks. And so, like, to me, it doesn't matter that JD Vance is a good debater. I know that he is. It doesn't matter that he's articulate or that he understands policy. It doesn't matter that we have studies that show that Google's biased. I already know all of that stuff.
So the bottom line is you're not going to admit I was right about JD Vance?
No, the bottom line is that I want to apply the friend-enemy distinction against my enemies. Yeah. And when I go on their channels or when I go on their newspapers and loan them my credibility, I'm not treating them like enemies. I'm treating them like they're a neutral ground where you can debate, you know, the marketplace of ideas. They're not neutral. The New York Times is not neutral. Google's not neutral. CBS is not neutral. They're left-wing hacks. But when we go on, we're sending a signal that, hey, we recognize that you're neutral when we know they're not. They know they're not.
So, and this is the part
you get where I'm going with
No,
this,
I do. And I do. And again, my own policy has been I interact with the mainstream media very, very little. But I do still think it's something at this level, there's some value to it depending on how it's done. Now, you're also right. Like, you do it to a certain point and then you stop, right? You don't go on anymore once you've actually made your point. The question I will always have is, are there enough people watching these channels that when they see this can be convinced of that point and either turn off or look to something else or whatever? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know I'm very grateful for people like JD Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy who have done a very, very good job of interacting in such a way as to just really bring to light the complete lack of credibility, because there are various things that usually have to coincide in order to make it so apparent. Because when you have like a John McCain running against a Barack Obama, it's not as obvious. When you have a Mitt Romney running against Barack Obama, it's not as obvious. When you have a JD Vance and a Donald Trump ticket against Kamala Harris and Walz, the press have just pulled out all the stops in a way that has become more blatant than ever before. And I do think JD Vance has done yeoman's work in just demonstrating just how ridiculous this has gotten. Now, again, when they win, I think they should start starving the press of attention. And I think they should find other mechanisms to go through. And to include mechanisms that might be more on the left, but are still dedicated to some idea of objective truth, objective reality, logic, linear thinking, you know, all of those things which are now attributes of whiteness according to the woke. All right, we are going to jump ahead right now. We're going to go into some of our election breakdown. I have some infographics we want to show everybody because we have somebody. We're going to show you this Substack. It's pretty good. This guy did a bunch of infographics with respect to things like car loan interest rates, price of gasoline, price of diesel, price of electricity, manufacturing jobs, you know, minority home ownership, like all this stuff. And it's pretty good stuff, and it's really shareable. So it's John's Ascensionalia. That's his Substack. We're gonna go ahead and provide some links to it, and we're still gonna show this later. But first things first, I want to jump into who's gonna win the election. So we've already talked about some of the stuff that JD Vance was doing. We've talked about some of the stuff that the press is obviously doing. There's no question that mainstream Hollywood, mainstream press is all in the bag for Kamala Harris, but we're seeing her lose support in certain areas that I would say used to be strong ones. I'm going to point out that my crazy prediction, because we did all this, I think, back in like March or April, we had a prediction episode where we talked about what we thought would happen in November, because we thought it would be funny to make
and we also thought it was Biden back then.
We did. We made a bunch of predictions based
except for me.
No, Tina was the only one that called it that Biden would not be the nominee. Christian and I thought it would still be Biden. But we made we thought it would be fun to make a bunch of predictions all the way back then and then come back and look at him now. Well, we're only a few weeks away from November 5th now. So we got a lot more data, a lot more stuff has happened. We're going to do some more bold predictions. But one of my bold predictions was that Donald Trump would win 30% of the black male vote, because we required everybody to have kind of like an outlandish prediction, like, oh my gosh, is that even possible?
And that was back when it was Biden.
That was back when it was Biden.
And now it's Kamala. And I think
when Barack Obama has to come out and scold black men because they're not voting for Kamala. And the left's answer to this every single time is, well, some of them are just not ready for a female president. Bull crap. This has nothing to do with people not being ready for a female president. I guarantee you, if, Margaret Thatcher was running, right, you'd see a lot of people on the right perfectly fine with a female president. But this is always what the left goes to. Oh, you don't like any of my policies? It must be because of the color of my skin. Oh, you don't like any of my policies? Oh, it must be because of my genitalia. No, it could just be that I think you're a moron. Or it could just be that I don't agree with your policies. But nope, Barack Obama had to come out. And I'll tell you what, some of the stuff that came out on Twitter of black men responding to it, black women responding to it, where it was like, do not lecture me. I was like, dang. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to do kind of a swing state breakdown, because look, we all know Massachusetts is going for Kamala Harris. We all know Tennessee's going for Trump Vance. But when we look at this,
Michigan just moved into a toss-up.
Well, when we look at the swing states, we're going to start there, but we're also going to look at things like betting markets. We're going to look at things like early voting in places like Pennsylvania and North Carolina. We're going to look at 2016 versus 2020 versus 2024. What was the state of the race at this point in those years versus now, and what does it tell us? Plus, we're also going to look at some of the biggest surprises that is coming out of the data that we currently have, things that I don't think any of us here actually expected, but are giving us really, really good indications of who could potentially win this thing. So, Christian, take it away on the swing state breakdown. Let's start there.
Okay, so let me get through all of the all the links that you have up here.
No. Just go to Real Clear Politics or wherever we're starting.
Okay,
with.
So first off, remember this thread?
Yeah.
So I want to walk the audience through it just briefly again to remind people of where we are once we look at polling here.
Yeah, those are kind of hard to read for some folks, so I'm glad you're going to break it down.
Okay, so this is voting history per swing state relative to the country. So you know how like there could be one election where in 2004 George Bush won the popular vote by like a point, but then in 2008 Obama won it by like 7. That's a big shift. Yeah. Well, what we want to look at is how did each state vote in relation to the national popular vote, because we know that the national popular vote can swing quite a lot year to year. So this is evening out, all of the messiness between
So just
cycles.
so everyone, when you're looking at this, you're obviously going to say, oh, but Trump didn't win Pennsylvania by 3 points in 2020. We're not saying he won it by 3 points. We're saying that the overall state vote shifted.
It was 3 points redder than the country was.
And
in 2016, it was, in 2020, it was 3.3.
Yeah.
And in 2016, it was almost 3. It was 2.8.
Okay.
So when you look at the trend line there, you can see something really interesting. For 20 years, Pennsylvania has been getting redder, right? In 2004, it was almost 5 points to the left of the country. And then what's crazy, this should have been a red flag to Democrats. In 2008, when Obama was winning the country in a landslide, Pennsylvania actually moved to the right.
Yeah.
It still voted for Obama, right? But it moved to the right of where it was 4 years earlier in relation to the country. And
by
then
almost, by what?
Almost 2 points.
Yeah.
And then in 2012, it again moved to the right. And so those were warnings. And Obama he was a terrible president, but he was really good at running for president.
Oh yeah,
right?
Super popular.
And yet that should have been a warning sign to Democrats that, PA might one day become a swing state. And then lo and behold, in 2016, it flipped. And then in 2020, Trump only barely lost it. And so you see the same thing in a lot of these swing states. So in Michigan, it's something similar. Like in 2008, I mean, Michigan was a very blue state in 2008, right? It was almost D plus 10, and then it kept getting redder. And in 2020, it actually shifted back, but it was still to the right of the country. And you see the same thing in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, it's even redder than Michigan. In Wisconsin, it's almost R plus 4 in 2020. It moved a whole point to the right. Despite the fact that Biden won it, it moved a whole point to the right in comparison to the nationwide popular vote in 2020.
So we're watching what you might consider to be left of center swing states consistently get these are the swing states that have been swing states
the
for,
blue
let's
wall.
Say, yeah, well we'll say they've been swing states for well over 20 years.
Well, no, they haven't been. That's the thing. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were really only swing states in 2016. Wisconsin is the one exception. Wisconsin was competitive in 2000 and 2004.
Okay.
Michigan was not a swing state.
No, that's true.
Until
That's true.
2016. It hadn't been since the 80s. Pennsylvania was not a swing state until 2016. It had always been usually voting for Democrats by like 5 points or 6 points.
So these are the states that were either the blue wall or they were states that were they were voting Democrat in every presidential election that slowly have been moving more and more to the right to the point where they've even crossed over in certain elections or have gotten far closer than they have been in the last 30 years.
These are what's called the blue wall states.
Okay.
And people just didn't notice until 2016 that they had been getting redder because they had voted Democrat in every election from Bill Clinton all the way to Obama, right? So that's like 5 elections in a row.
But now we're also seeing the opposite in certain states.
Yes. So like Georgia, we have the exact opposite problem, right? Like in 2004, it was R plus 14, and now it's only R plus 4. So Georgia's moving away from us.
Also, that's something, too, because we talk a lot about the whole idea of geographical self-sorting and whatnot, and the question would be like, what the heck has happened to Georgia? That we got, and I would say that part of the policies within that state is they have really encouraged certain industry, especially Hollywood and others, in order to come to Georgia, and they've really just blown up the suburban area around Atlanta. And the end result is that it is having a pretty significant impact with respect to their elections. So it's like, yeah, we're a great place to do business. We're a great place to live. We're a great place to do all these things. Well, okay, and then you manipulated your own economy and your tax base or tax system in order to encourage certain industries to come here. And lo and behold, it's not having the best effect on you overall voting-wise.
Same thing with Arizona, right? You know, in 2008 when McCain ran, it was R plus 15, almost 16, and now it's only R plus 4, right? And so like
and you can
the
look
Sun
at
Belt's
that.
moving away from us. Although Nevada is interesting. Nevada's actually moved towards us. In 2020, Trump lost Nevada, and no Republican has won it since 2004. But you know, what's funny is Nevada's actually, in relation to the national popular vote, actually now redder than it was in 2004 when George Bush was the last Republican to carry it. And in, you know, the Obama era and then in Hillary Clinton, it was more Democrat than the country. But since 2008, it's been getting redder every single cycle. And so there's always this idea that like, oh, maybe this will be the year that we finally flip Nevada because it's moving in our direction. But overall, like the Sun Belt has been moving away from us and the Rust Belt has been moving towards us, with some exceptions being Nevada being like the big outlier there, Michigan being the outlier in the Rust Belt where it moved towards us, but then in 2020 it moved away from us. So but the overall trend, though.
Well, what I think is interesting about some of these, like go down and look at Texas here, because I want to point this out, Texas and Florida, because you kind of have different tales going on here, right?
Texas got bluer, but not massively so.
Yeah, Texas got bluer, but not, I mean, R plus 10 is still pretty significant. And then you look over at Florida. Florida's moving in the other direction again. So Florida's always been fairly consistent. If you look in the 80s, it was very Republican. But then it really started to shift. 2000, obviously barely won it. But then it went to 4, then 3, then 7 in 2020. So it's maintaining. North Carolina, scroll down there.
North Carolina is a static. It hasn't changed.
Yeah,
look at it. Since the 80s, it has not changed.
Yeah, 2000 and 2004. Yeah, 2004 there was a significant change, but other than that, it's remained pretty consistent. Virginia's gone completely the other direction.
Virginia's a disaster for us.
Virginia has really been, well, Virginia's also been a case study in what happens when you massively expand the federal government in your state, and that's essentially what happened, especially with the war on terror and everything else. We imported a massive population into Northern Virginia.
There is
Colorado was something similar too. Colorado was interesting, but here's the thing I want to point out about this, because I think this is interesting. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, These states are not becoming more conservative because a bunch of conservatives move there. They're becoming more conservative, I think, in some part because they've lived under the worst of some of these policies.
Really? Because I actually think they become more conservative because Democrats are locusts and they don't realize that it's their policies that made the place they live in a hellhole, and they go seeking opportunity elsewhere where it hasn't been destroyed by a bunch of rabid liberals. And I think that's one of the reasons those places are getting more red, is because some folks are realizing, oh, they messed this place up. And then the other folks are going, oh, why don't I go find another place to screw up?
Well, here's the thing. Wait a second. I need to finish this point.
Okay.
The states that have actually become a little bit more problematic, that used to be solid, Colorado used to be pretty, not overwhelmingly conservative, but certainly more in play than it's been in the last 20 years. The fact that Texas is dropped like 10 points from where it was in 2020, and you could say, well, that was Bush. He was running his home state. You could say like Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, some of these other places. I do wonder how much of that is impacted by the fact that Californians, if you look at where like a lot of Californians are moving to, a lot of New Yorkers are moving to, they're moving to places like Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, right? And it's impacting the way, but to your point, why did they move? Now, some people, well, I moved New York because it was cold, I got older, and I moved to a warmer climate. Okay.
Usually, though.
What's California's excuse? Right? You don't got to leave California to find the sun.
And that doesn't account for the surge, because people in their older years have always been switching states for better weather. So that's a constant as you get older. Yeah. So, no, we're talking about, oh, the opportunities are gone. Oh, I can't make the money here. Or, there's too many homeless. I got to step over homeless and their fecal matter before I, taking my kid to school.
Look at this interesting stat that I found over the weekend. So I'm on Dave's redistricting, which Nick can tell you I love spending my time here. Yeah. I've colored in Northern Virginia and the counties and cities that make up Northern Virginia. So that's like Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, Arlington, Alexandria, and then a couple small cities like Manassas, Falls Church, stuff like that. And I've left the rest of the state blank. So what this means is that when you look at the vote total for the rest of the state, ROVA, rest of Virginia, you can end up looking at the 2012 and 2020 cycles and look at the rest of Virginia in 2012. Mitt Romney barely won it against Obama, but then look at 2020. It has changed. The margin has gone from 51-48 in 2012 to 50-48 in 2020. The rest of Virginia has not changed at all since 2020.
Yeah.
And yet Virginia went from voting for Obama by like about 3 points in 2012 to voting for Biden by 10. I mean, Virginia went off the table from being, the swing state in the country briefly in 2012 to not even competitive in 2020. And the entire reason is not because of all the white counties and cities you see in downstate. Those haven't changed since 2012. The only reason Virginia has become a blue state is literally because of all those blue localities that I've highlighted in Northern Virginia: Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington, Loudoun, Prince William. Mm-hmm. That has been solely responsible for Virginia going from being a swing state to a blue state, which is part of the reason why we need Trump to get elected, because if he can actually do to the federal bureaucracy what Elon did to Twitter, then Virginia might actually come back.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring that up because that was kind of interesting. But, looking at this trend here, I always go back to this in part because I haven't seen a lot of people cover the historical trends here. And this can illustrate what we're seeing in the polling here. So now we're talking about what we think is actually going to happen. So there's 7 key swing states this cycle. You have 3 in the upper Midwest, the old blue wall, and then you have 4 in the Sun Belt. So the 7 are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Those put together are going to ultimately decide the presidency. Not Texas, not Florida, not New York, unfortunately not Virginia. I know that people are talking about those states, but those 7 that I listed earlier are going to be the ones who decide it. So if we're going to make some predictions here, then let's probably start with the big one. Let's start with Pennsylvania here. So the Real Clear Politics average right now is that Trump is leading by 0.3.
Wow, that's so close.
And here's the trend line. You can see why Biden dropped out, can't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Trump was polling at 4.5 in Pennsylvania right before Biden dropped out. And then it tightened up. But you know what we've seen since Biden dropped out? So Harris surged, right? Because what happened was that Democrats came home. And by the way, this is going to be a reoccurring pattern that you're going to see in every single one of these swing states. But since August 16th, when Harris kind of like stabilized herself after, about a month or so after Biden had dropped out, it's really been seesawing. And then there was this period in September where Harris took a lead. But since then, the state's been trending red again, really since September 19th. So it's been about a month now of the state getting slowly a little bit redder again. Trump is more or less about polling where he was shortly before Biden dropped out. It's just that Harris has consolidated Democrats, Democrats that were disaffected, that weren't enthusiastic to vote for Biden. But the polling is neck and neck right now. But what's interesting is that if you look at the historical record, this time 4 years ago, Biden was leading by 6.
Yeah, and Clinton
was leading by 8.
Yeah, this is the part
and 4 years ago, Biden leading by 6 in Pennsylvania ended up being a razor-thin margin for Trump. Yeah. Razor-thin. So the fact that Trump is pretty much neck and neck, like barely just slightly above her, means he's probably going to actually take the state by a lot more than that.
Well, we'd have to look at the specific
Well,
numbers.
I guess if the polling data is the same.
This is specific for Pennsylvania, but it shows the overall issue right now that she has, because again, we can look at popular votes, you can look at neck and neck in the popular vote, but that's not ultimately the popular vote gives you some indication of where the country is.
Yeah, but they always underpoll him.
You have to zero in on the swing states that are going to provide the electoral votes to get you over the number you need. So, all right. So if right now in Pennsylvania, where is this? Yeah, this is Pennsylvania. So he's 0.3 ahead in Pennsylvania.
The regular politics average.
Yeah. So if we're looking at it, if we're looking at the standpoint of where does Harris need to be in order to be fairly confident that she wins Pennsylvania, based off of previous polling, at this stage of the game, she really should be over 6.
Well, I mean, if the historical record is correct, but keep in mind that these are things
they did try to adjust for the polling problems.
Yeah.
But we still don't know if that adjustment did the trick, or if it went all the way, or even if it went too far.
So this was the historical polling results versus the actual results in Pennsylvania. So in 2016, Clinton led in the regular politics average on election day by 2.1 in Pennsylvania, and she lost it by 0.7. So the polling was off in Trump's favor by 2.8. But in 2020, Pennsylvania was actually the only swing state in the country where the polls were dead accurate. They massively undershot Trump pretty much everywhere, but Pennsylvania was the one place, and in part because it's the most important swing state, I think a lot of the polling firms tried really hard to get Pennsylvania right.
Yeah.
And they were. It was the only state in the entire country where the regular politics average was exactly dead on to what the actual result was. Biden won it by 1.2, and that's what the polling average showed. So that is one argument in favor of the
allegedly,
idea,
if you don't think it was stolen.
But that is one argument in favor of the idea that the average that we see here might not be that far off from what the actual result is.
Okay.
And so I actually disagree with the idea that Harris needs to be leading by 6 in order to have a shot in Pennsylvania.
So you think the polling in Pennsylvania has improved enough to where if they're telling you that this is the RCP average, it's probably within a point of where it's actually at?
Probably within a point, certainly within 2, I would feel like.
Okay.
And keep in mind, remember the trend line that we talked about, the state's average versus, compared to the national average, and how Pennsylvania had been getting redder, and now, in 2020 it was R plus 3.3.
Yeah.
When we look at the average here in regular politics and we compare it to the nationwide polling average, which is in favor of Harris by 1.4 points right now.
Yeah.
If these were to happen, what this would mean is that Pennsylvania would end up clocking in at 1.6 points redder than the nation. That's a big drop from 2020 where it was 3.3. Mm-hmm. And that's a shift of 1.6 points to the left of the nationwide result. Now, is it likely that Pennsylvania will shift bluer relative to the nation right now? Almost certainly. And the reason why is because Trump is surging in blue areas right now. Yeah. You're seeing polling in like California and data coming out of places like California, early vote right now. He's crushing it in Orange County. He's going to lose California. I see all these people on my Twitter feed and just in general that are like, because I post every day, I post an update of Virginia's early numbers.
Yeah.
Which we might get to because how
I
definitely
want to talk about early voting, but yeah, you're right. It's the point of people see this and like,
they see this and they're like, does this mean that Trump has a shot in California? No, Trump has no shot in California. He's gonna lose it. He'll be lucky to get 40% in California.
Yeah.
If he gets 40% in California, that's a great sign.
Yeah.
He's not gonna win it. He's not gonna win New York. But the fact is, those states are going to get much redder, and so that means that Trump's electoral college advantage compared to his popular vote margin is going to shrink a lot. In 2020, he lost the popular vote by 4.5 points, which in some ways is a lot, but he barely lost the presidency by just a couple thousand votes in a few swing states.
Yeah.
That is not going to happen again this time. He needs to probably come within 2 points of the popular vote in order to win it. He can still afford to lose the popular vote, but he needs to come much closer. And so I just want to get that across to people because we should actually expect a state like Pennsylvania to shift bluer relative to the popular vote because I think the popular vote is going to get redder.
Yeah, because he's picking up votes in states that from electoral college standpoint don't matter, but do impact the popular vote, which again, this is not a bad thing, right? It's just about understanding how one thing figures relative to another thing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So what the other part here, so is that, did you want to go through anything else with respect to the swing states?
Let's
I'd like to look at a couple others. I mean, we've seen a few.
Let's look at Michigan because this is an interesting one.
Michigan just moved into toss-up territory today, I think.
For a long time, people thought that after Biden dropped out, to give the update, because the last time we did this, it was looking like it was going to be a Trump landslide against Biden. Biden drops out. Harris replaces him. She surges because she consolidates the Democrat base. In doing so, a state like Michigan went, in a lot of people's eyes, from being previously Trump-leaning state to rapidly becoming a toss-up to then rapidly becoming a Harris-leaning state. Well, now, here's the trend line. It started to come back.
Yeah.
Right? So, it was tightening up and then Biden implodes. And then he drops out, and look, Harris immediately consolidates, and then it shifts back blue. But really, since just the last couple weeks, it's been rapidly trending to the right, and now Trump is actually leading by almost a whole point. He's actually leading more in Michigan than in Pennsylvania now, according to the Rickler Politics average.
Crazy.
And I think part of the reason why is because the demographics in Michigan are slightly different from Pennsylvania. I was actually talking at the Homesteaders Convention. We had people from all over the place that came. People from Alaska. We had one from Canada that drove down. We had a lot of people that I spoke to. It was crazy that they wanted to speak to me, that were actually from Michigan. And I had a good conversation with a couple of these people from Michigan over the weekend. And we were talking about the demographics. Michigan is different from Pennsylvania. They're both upper Midwest swing states. But Michigan has a lot more blue-collar, working-class people.
Yeah.
Their suburbs in Michigan are not as affluent as the suburbs in Pennsylvania. When you think of Chester County, Delco, Montgomery County, the York area, Berks, Bucks, the northern Philadelphia suburbs are working class, but the western suburbs, like the main line heading towards Chester, that's very wealthy, like some of the richest zip codes in the country, actually.
Yeah.
And people don't think about a state like Pennsylvania as having very wealthy areas, but there are some incredibly wealthy suburbs around Philadelphia. You don't get that as much in Michigan. The suburbs around Detroit, with the exception of parts of Oakland County, are more blue-collar suburbs. They're working-class suburbs. The rich parts are more like around Grand Rapids, like Kent County, but that's not as large.
Okay, but let me ask you this. So I think one of the things that has been interesting is if you would have asked anybody 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it would have been kind of a foregone conclusion. The Democratic Party was the party of the working class, and the Republicans were the party of the corporations or the moneyed, the landed gentry or whatever it was, right? And clearly that's changed in many respects because one, corporate America has shifted the left pretty significantly, and then the other part too is they've become, the Democratic Party has really become the party of the university, the college educated, which again they like to use that as, well, this is an example of how much smarter our voters than you are. It's like, okay, well, I don't know how smart it is to go $100,000 into debt to get a gender studies degree, but apparently that makes you brilliant. But it really is something where you have a certain sector of the population that might be, the there's certainly a sector of the population which is entirely dependent upon government assistance that seems to vote more overwhelmingly for Democrats. And then there's the suburban college educated, that also seems to be shifting pretty significantly for the Democrats. You have actually sectors of the inner city that, while it's still overwhelmingly blue, have actually been shifting to the right recently by comparison. And then you have the rural counties, which have typically been, red strongholds. But it also depends on who within those red counties. So it's interesting how you look at places in the, when we say Northern Virginia, we're usually talking about places like Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington. If you just looked at a map, you would be like, well, this is Northern Virginia. Except those of us here in Culpeper that are considered Northern Virginia by
we
people
are not
who
Northern Virginia.
We are not Northern
Virginia. We're
Virginia.
Central Virginia.
We're Central Virginia. We're the Piedmont, right? But what it comes down to, though, is that you will have a lot of people that as that urban area expands, the wealthier people within those urban areas generally they'll come out here and they end up, they get their weekend property or whatnot.
Yep.
And depending on where they actually register to vote, it can have an impact on that. Whereas your people that are more working class, I find increasingly are overwhelmingly conservative. And I think that and it wasn't because of Mitt Romney. I think Donald Trump spoke to people that have felt completely abandoned by both the Democratic Party and the breakdown of American manufacturing and a number of other factors. And they really felt like he got it. Even if they didn't need him to have the same experience growing up. They didn't need him to have worked in the mines at one point. They just wanted somebody that was going to speak to them with respect and give them some indication that American manufacturing could make a comeback.
And just champion them in general. There was this exchange recently. I don't have the clip up. I wish I did. But there was this exchange on Bill Maher's show between these two individuals. This was just a couple days ago. One was a Democrat operative, and then the other one was a Republican-leaning guy. And this Democrat, she was saying if the problem is that these people are revolting against progress and they just need to get over it, yada yada, and she was just incredibly arrogant and dismissive of these voters, which is very funny. And these voters in these states that her party needs to win.
Yeah.
And then this guy says, "I'm sorry, but if you're saying." Sorry, but the new definition of progress means nobody's allowed to speak for you. Yeah. Nobody's allowed to advocate for your interests. Nobody's allowed to champion you. Forget you. Just, we're moving past you and we're going to make your life miserable and you just need to suck it up and deal with it. You should not be shocked when you lose those people overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
This should not be up for debate why Donald Trump is even competitive in a state like Michigan.
Yeah.
Well, it's because 60-70% of the population in Michigan has been treated like trash by the Democratic Party. They hate these people. They absolutely despise the people in this state. There was this other clip of Hassan Piker. Do you know who that is? Mm-hmm. So piece of work this guy is. He's like a trust fund baby. He's super wealthy and he champions himself as like a Marxist, streamer who talks about how based Hamas and Hezbollah are all the time.
Yeah.
And he did this podcast with another soy boy, and he was saying things like, "Oh man, we really need to be sounding the alarm about the right's, appeal to young men. The under 30 demographic is just zooming to the right, and we don't have any response to it." And I want to be like, "What do you mean you don't have any response to it? You're the reason they're zooming to the right. You have treated them like absolute trash. You cannot apply the friend-enemy distinction against a group of people ruthlessly, publicly say." There's no group in this country that has gotten more hate from the left than young, straight, white men who haven't done anything with their lives yet because they're too young to have done anything with their lives yet. We shouldn't be surprised when a 21-year-old guy, he hasn't had the time to build a career or do anything, let alone oppress anybody.
Oh, Eric Weinstein in his interview with Chris Williamson. Oh my gosh, dude! I've seen Eric talk before, and Eric is always very, very composed. And again, comes from academia. He's a physicist, I believe. But he also does social commentary and some other things, but not at all like a right wing conservative guy. Not woke. In fact, he was one of the original founding members of the whole intellectual dark web and this whole idea of I may not be conservative, but I'm also not woke because I believe in things like objective reality and science and logic. He was having this discussion about the direction that young men were going. And he's like, well, I have a teenage son. I think he's 18 or 19 now. And he was like, where exactly did the left give him to go? He's like, you systematically went after them and gave them no place. And I don't necessarily agree with all of Eric's assessment. He was saying they didn't go to the right. They just left you.
Yes.
And it was this point where Eric was like, leave our sons alone. And he even said, he goes, I don't have a Republican bone in my body, but leave our sons alone. We need to get them away from them. And I wish Eric would understand that, Eric, this is all coming from one direction. At some point, I'm not asking anybody to be a Republican, right? I get people that get frustrated with parties, but I am asking people to observe reality and understand that this is baked into leftist philosophy. It's not by accident.
This was a long time coming, and you just didn't recognize the signs right away. You wanted to sweep it under the rug. Now it's unavoidable. Now it's glaringly obvious, and now you have a problem with it.
And I don't have time anymore for, let's just, no. I'm sorry. It's become obvious at this point. I do believe someone that can be, I believe someone can be intellectually honest and consistent and left of center, right? I believe that there's such a thing as people that can want more social programs, but also believe in private property ownership, and that, I don't know, the laws of logic actually apply. The problem is that is not the common theory within the ruling class of woke progressives that are currently dictating the direction of the Democratic Party. And if you are unwilling to acknowledge that, I have some questions on whether or not you really understand what's going on. And that's one of the problems that we have. That's a conversation for a different day, but it's one of the reasons why we get so frustrated with the moment someone on the left understands that the left has gone crazy. The right instantly says, oh, come over here and lead us. No, dude, you don't get to lead us. I'm glad you've finally woken up to what's going on, but until you can effectively understand the underlying causes for why it's taking place, I don't want to take a lot of direction from you on what we should be doing now. I'm happy to hear your perspective and insight, because we believe in freedom of inquiry and civil discussion. But again, is what it is.
So are we supposed to start making our predictions now, or is that?
Well, there was one more that we wanted to get into the betting markets.
There's
right?
two things that I want to show people.
Okay.
So this one,
yeah, this is good.
This is a really good example of the looming disaster that awaits
Yes.
Democrats in the city of Philadelphia right now.
Yeah.
Philadelphia is about to experience probably one of the largest shifts to the right of any inner city in the country
by
in
which group?
40, 50 years.
By which group?
Hispanics, blacks, Asians,
No, but specifically.
Black men.
Thank you.
Black men are I mean, the polling is very clear on this, that black men are about to massive. Now, we're not going to win them. We're not even going to come close to winning them. We're going to lose them at best. At best. And I don't think this is going to happen, but you do. At best, we're going to lose them 70-30. But you have to remember that 10 years ago, we were losing them literally 90-10.
Yeah.
Maybe even more than 90-10. And in 2020 and 2016, we were probably losing them 87-12 or something like that.
I think the best we've ever been at is when 13% is whoa.
Yeah, 13% thereabouts. And
except for the first time Republicans were on the ballot.
Okay, right. Pre-Great Depression, pre-FDR, we have not come close with this demographic. And more likely we'll probably lose them 80-20 or something like that. But again, that's still you're talking thousands of votes in a city like Philadelphia that will flip because of that.
Well, we got this on screen, so let's.
So here's what Obama. This guy's kind of lost his luster because
definitely
he goes to Philadelphia. He speaks to young black men, and there were also some Hispanics too.
Yeah.
And this is his closing argument for Kamala Harris. He says, quote, and you're coming up with all kinds of he's speaking to young black men, and he says, and you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that, because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president, and you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. Women in our lives have been getting our backs this entire time. When we get in trouble and the system isn't working for us, they're the ones out there marching and protesting. And now you're thinking about sitting out or supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable. No, Barack, people are thinking about sitting out or even voting against somebody who's denigrated you because you've been denigrating them.
Yes.
Your closing message to young men, and particularly young black men, is do better. That's your closing message?
Yeah.
This party has completely lost the ability to speak to men, period. Let alone young black men, let alone young white men. They do not know. You know the one demographic that this party, the Democratic Party, knows how to speak to now? Suburban, college indoctrinated, wealthy, single females. The awfuls. The affluent white female liberal. That's who they know. That is the only demographic in this entire country that they know how to speak to. And it's because the Democratic Party has become feminized. The Democratic Party has emasculated itself. It is declared itself an enemy of masculinity.
Whoa. I want you to know right now.
And then when they try to introduce masculinity, Tim Walz doesn't know how to load a shotgun.
Yeah.
Or you have to hire a bunch of theater kids to do the whole be a man thing.
I don't know if you saw in fact,
that was the gayest ad I've ever seen in my entire life.
It was so freaking gay.
I've been thinking to myself, like, how fun would it be to do a parody of that ad? Where it's like someone's like using a wrench to pound in a nail or something.
Not a single one of them were of the ilk they were portraying them to be. None of them were like the manly men or any.
No.
These were theater kids who spent their life as theater kids who probably they pried them out of their mom's basement to go and stand in a field with a little straw hanging out their mouth, and a little cowboy hat on. And it was such a fraud, and we could all tell it was a fraud. But then somebody took it upon themselves to go through, and I don't have it in front of me, but I laughed my head off when I saw it. Someone took it upon themselves to make a list of the people that were featured in that, what their occupation really is, and what else they've been in, and not a single one of them were an everyday man.
No.
Okay, I found the exchange.
Okay, we'll watch this, but for a second I want to say I really wanted to do a parody of the white dudes for Kamala or whatever, where it's just like, I'm a white dude for Kamala because the woman I'm in a polyamorous relationship with told me I should be. I do what I'm told. It's like...
Here's the transcript as well. So this was Buck Sexton. That's who it was. He was on Bill Maher's show just a couple days ago, and this exchange is just incredible.
All right.
So the Democrat operative Laura Coates was basically, saying like, well, we've forgotten these people and good riddance to them.
Yeah.
And so here's his response.
I'm glad it was an eloquent point, and I'm glad you got to make the eloquent point, telling working class voters who are men in particular, but white working class male voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, sorry, bro, the progress means that no one can speak for you and no one can be in favor of your interests.
But aren't working class people also people
who are going to be
color?
confused.
It's why is it just men? Women are working class as well, you realize.
No, of course, but we're speaking about masculinity and why, right, the topic at hand is why is it that the Republican Party is the party of guys who are, that talk about masculinity in traditional terms, that speak about courage, that speak about getting after it, that speak about taking risks. And the Democrats are, announce your pronouns, let's have boys pretend they're girls in the locker rooms, let's put tampons in the... This is just reality. They call him, what's his name?
I mean, those things happen. They don't happen everywhere.
Well, but they happen in enough places that the Democrat Party won't condemn it. And so you ask why? Why are they okay with all of this?
Why is courage only a masculine quality?
Oh these are...
No, pause it real quick. This is perfect. A conversation about masculinity and what is the female Democrat operative doing every 5 seconds? Well, but what about women? What about women? Like, dude, we get it. We're trying to explain to you why men don't resonate with the Democratic Party. We're trying to explain to you that when you dress up a bunch of theater kids in cowboy hats and leather jackets to talk about how manly they are, it doesn't resonate. Because the moment we tell you this is what we care about, we get interrupted and shut down.
You get the longhouse.
And told we don't care. So, okay, great. Message received. Right? What do Democrats always like to tell us? It's not for you. We get it. The Democratic Party is not for us. Message received. And we will be giving our response on November 5th. And then when you lose and they just weren't ready for a woman. Well, we're not ready for you, right? I don't consider you all women. I don't consider Kamala Harris a good representation of all women. So no, I won't be voting for it. And if you want to chalk it up to that, I don't care anymore. Like, this is the biggest part that they fail to understand. We get what you're doing. We get that you don't care about us. We get that you don't like us. We get that we've become the enemy to you, right? And for decades, we've tried to contend with that. And now we're like, nah, no need.
No, I don't care anymore.
No need.
You
Don't
are my
care.
enemy.
Don't care.
Sorry, not you, our audience, right? But we're getting to a point now where the response from the right to people like this is going to be exactly what you just said, Nick. Message received. You've declared me the enemy. You're my enemy as well.
Yeah.
Well,
I just don't care what you have to say about me
Well,
anymore because you want to hurt me.
I used to try to convince them I'm not your enemy. And then I realized
I don't care. No, they are my enemy.
Christian.
Sorry.
I used to try to convince them I'm not your enemy. And here's what I realized. I only get half a say in that conversation. And if you believe I'm your enemy and you are therefore going to treat me like your enemy, at some point it no longer pays for me to pretend that I'm not. Because you've put me in an impossible situation. It's one of the sayings we had in the military. The enemy gets a say. Well, they've now decided I'm the enemy. What am I supposed to do? Just sit down there and let them kick me some more? No, I'm not going to, because here's the dirty little secret. We're the last people you should be trying to kick.
Right. If they're going to identify you as the enemy, then maybe you should operate as such. And here's the other thing is, for eons, various people groups, ethnicities or interest groups have pushed this idea of voting in block. So like women are kind of voting in block. You would have the Jewish vote, or you would have the black vote, or the Hispanic vote, and so they break these things down this way. And I think what's starting to really show and develop is you're going to have the male vote and you're going to have the female vote now as two different voting demographics,
which is not
two
good
different
for
voting
society.
blocks.
We're going to turn into South Korea.
And at that point, it doesn't matter what the ethnicity is. Men are men, and they're going to vote with the men, and women, well, I won't. I'll vote with the men too. But we're only going to be able to peel off a few, just like what has happened with various demographics in the past, where we can only peel off a few. We can only convince a few because people are really lockstep in line with voting in block together. Well, I think we're about to encounter that sooner probably rather than later.
Well, and again,
with male versus female.
The part this goes into, and we've talked about this with our good friend Rudyard Lynch from What If Alt Hist. It's one of the things that we keep fighting for is like, look, we understand that there's going to be a backlash. We're trying to make sure that backlash goes in a positive direction, because we don't want the answer to be that it's all men versus women. We don't want that to be what it is. The left is kind of pushing us into this dynamic to some degree. And you don't want the sort of backlash that goes too far. But listen, we've got a couple more things we're going to go through right here, because I want to go over some of the biggest surprises to point out, as well as
you get some, but then I get some, because I have some data that I've uncovered.
No. Okay, show. Here's the deal. Anyone can look up Real Clear Politics and look at the polls and see that Trump's doing much better in the swing states than he did in 2016 or 2020. So that's a good sign. That all points in a very positive direction with respect to the Electoral College. The other thing with the popular vote is it also looks like Trump is doing better with the popular vote than he did in 2016 and 2020. A lot of that because he's actually gone into some of these states for which he has no real chance of winning the Electoral College, but that doesn't mean he's not buttressing support, which impacts those overall numbers, which are important for legitimacy.
That would be a huge vibe shift if he won the popular vote, because let's be honest, the left prides itself on being like, we're the majority, we believe in democracy. If they lose to this man in the popular vote with their DEI candidate who can't articulate a single sentence and was literally only picked in order to fill an ideological void, Joe Biden himself said so. Democrats don't actually care about Kamala Harris. As Elon Musk said, she is a puppet. She's a puppet for the Leviathan. And if she was replaced with somebody else, her replacement would be a puppet as well. Democrats know this. But if they lose to this man, if they lose to Donald Trump, it will shatter their egos, because they're the party of progress. Yeah. We only move in one direction. We can't go back. And this man, he's a fascist. Yeah. He's a reactionary. He's a whatever. They throw all these words out to denigrate him. And if he wins the popular vote, it's going to be despite everything, despite you throwing the kitchen sink at him, despite him taking bullets, he still wins. It's a total vibe shift if it happens.
And we've got to kind of race through some of this stuff. And if we don't get through it quick enough, I will probably disappear from the podcast to go get Nick's mom from the airport.
That's right. She's flying in. All right. So let's go through the final part here with kind of biggest surprises. And let's do an overview of some of the biggest surprises.
Okay,
because, again, anybody can look at polls anywhere. prognosticator. What are you bringing to the table here that's super special for everybody?
Real quick, first off, betting markets are saying that Trump is favored right now. Now, this might be because Elon might have bought millions of shares, but so we'll just leave that aside, though. That is still good news, even though I wouldn't marry yourself to this.
Yeah.
More importantly, I've been tracking early vote. Actually, sorry, that's not it. This is it. Nope, that's not it either. This is it. Here we go. I've been tracking early voting every single day. So, Nick, you know this, that I've built this model going back to like your congressional run.
Yeah, this is also going to answer one of our super chats too, who was asking whether or not we're cannibalizing our own votes on election day. But please.
Yeah. So starting in 2019, I started building this early vote model to model how I think a general election would go. It did well for Paul Milday's race in 2019 for the state legislature. Unfortunately, we lost that race, although in Milday's favor, he did win a few years later. And then in 2020, when you ran for Congress, I built this privately and had a huge debate with Joe over who was right. Spoiler alert, I was unfortunately right because the model showed we would lose, and we did. So I kind of wish that I was wrong on that front. But nonetheless, it was correct. And then in 2021, I used the same model to accurately predict Youngkin's victory within 0.05% of the result. And then I skipped 2022 because I was too lazy to build the model, and I just tried to go full Nietzsche will to power and just will the red wave into existence. And obviously that didn't happen, much to my shame. But then in 2023, I ran the model again, and it accurately predicted the results for the state legislature in Virginia. So I'm doing it again this time, right? Here's what the numbers show right now. We are currently in a stronger position right now than we were in any of the last 3 election cycles in Virginia in terms of early voting. Much, much stronger position. This time in 2021, we were losing about 2-1 in early voting, and we won that year. Yeah. And in 2023, we barely lost. And in 2022, we got obliterated. Well, we didn't get obliterated, but it was just disappointing, right? Yeah. We didn't flip the 7th, and we only flipped the 2nd.
Yeah.
But look at where we are right now. The same. Remember, this is the same exact model that I ran for your congressional race in 2020, and the same exact model that I ran for Youngkin's gubernatorial race.
And it's not as if there's been a massive population influx in Virginia either. So yeah.
And it's the same model I ran last year for the legislature races, for the House and Senate in Virginia.
So for those of us who can't read or can't read it, can you explain what we're looking at? Because we got audio.
This is early vote breakdown by modeled party. We don't register by party, but I've been spending 5 years modeling by party, and it's been pretty accurate. And it currently shows that Democrats are about 59.5%. This is just early vote, not election day, obviously. Yeah. And Republicans are at 40.5%.
And usually they blow us out of the water early voting.
Well, again, but what he just showed, what he just showed everybody was the last 3 years, Democrats tend to win in the early vote by a fraction of about 60 to 65%.
Yeah, and they're currently under 60%. And this is after blue counties, big blue counties like Prince William, Fairfax, Loudoun opened up multiple polling centers and had an flood of in-person early votes. And this is not friendly territory to us. Remember that map I showed earlier about how Northern Virginia is the only reason the state has moved to the left? So you would think that it would massively shift to the left. Well, I've been tracking this on a daily basis, and it did shift a little bit to the left. But the thing is that, as I wrote at the bottom of this tweet thread here, that what happened is that you had a tsunami of early votes that came in over the weekend, but 13 days worth of Democrat gains were wiped out in one weekend. And then after, on Monday, there was this idea that, well, there was reporting lag, and that must have been the reason why, that must have, I love that account, Ohio Ducks for Trump. What a great name. The point is that there was this argument from Democrat operatives in Virginia that was like, well, just wait until the Prince William early votes come in, and then we're gonna recover. Spoiler alert, that is not what happened. If I go back to nope, this is it. Point is that actually this is not it. This is, sorry, my bad. This is it.
Okay.
This is it. So this is today.
Okay.
In fact, I typed this up
All right,
in the opening minutes of this podcast.
Yeah.
All right.
So what we've seen right now is that Democrats are crushing us with high propensity voters, right? 4 out of 4 voters. These are people that vote in even off-year elections for just the state legislature. These are loyal partisan hacks. I am one of those 157,041 people that vote in 4 out of 4 elections that voted for Donald Trump this year. So I'm in the modeled propensity 4 out of 4 voters for Republicans. But we're losing those people. The good news is that we can afford to lose those people in early because our people who if you voted last year for your freaking House of Delegates race, you're voting for the presidential race this year.
Let me do this real quick so everyone understands, right? That when we're talking about this model, you're going to see these numbers. It says model GOP propensity, model Democrat propensity. You'll see 0 out of 4, 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 4. 0 out of 4 is they never vote.
Or they're newly registered.
Or they're newly registered. So they never vote or newly registered. You're 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4. Maybe they vote in the presidential 1 year. Maybe they skip a year. Once you get into like 3 out of 4, 4 out of 4, these are people that they vote local, state, federal, like every election they are there, they show up. And so when you're looking at these numbers, you naturally expect the 4 out of 4 voters to be right up there with the highest numbers. No shock there. And you expect it to go down. What you were really looking for, and what Christian's pointing out here, is that when you look at the lowest propensity voters, the people that almost never vote, newly registered, these are the numbers that are like, wow.
We're beating Democrats 2-1 almost in 0 out of 4 voters in Virginia, a blue state.
That's
now, how do we know that?
Because this is the model that I've spent 5 years building. So a couple things. One, I trust the model with my life with the partisan component of it. That's me. So unfortunately, you're just going to have to take my word for it. But I would like to say I can point to the 2021 results or the last year results to prove that I trust these numbers.
Yeah, you get it
the
right.
propensity, though, I'm not coming up with that. That's actually publicly available data that our Department of Elections in Virginia tracks. They can track how often a voter votes. They can't tell you who they voted for, but they can track how often they voted. So we know for a fact how many 4 out of 4 or 0 out of 4 voters have voted. And then when you factor that into the partisan modeling, what we see is that we're crushing them with low propensity voters, and we're holding steady with these like mid propensity voters. And this isn't a demographic that we should be losing all of this because this is just the early vote. This isn't election day.
Okay, so that answers the question as to whether or not we're cannibalizing our day of voters by having them vote early, because if they would have voted anyway and they just voted early, that doesn't really help us much.
It doesn't necessarily help. It's still beneficial for 2 reasons, but yeah.
Right, because at least it's locked in.
Yeah.
But they're not going to miss it. But when you're looking at people who don't vote very often, that's where the rubber meets the road. We're actually getting people to vote who haven't voted before or rarely vote, and they're voting early, locking that vote in.
Yeah, our 0 out of 4 and 1 out of 4 numbers are very good because our 0 out of 4 actually beats the Democrats, like Kristen said, was 2-1. Our 1 out of 4 is very, very close. And
we should have no business competing in those categories.
This is, and so people understand this has always been a massive problem. Like in Virginia, we have off-year elections for our state elections. So we obviously vote for federal the same time everybody else does, right? But when it comes to our state house or our governor, those are never the same year as when we're voting in our federal elections. And so we have an election cycle every single year in Virginia. Believe me, it gets exhausting. But one of the biggest questions that we've always had is how do we do a better job of getting our low propensity voters out there to vote? And then how do we also do it within our state elections as well? In a place like Virginia, this bodes well, not just for Trump this year. It actually bodes well for us next year as well if we can keep those voters engaged. But the idea that 0 out of 4 and 1 out of 4 voters, that we are competing with the Democrats or beating them significantly beating them in one of those categories.
In a vote method that we always lose overwhelmingly.
If you would have told me that was going to be the case, I would have said no way. But what it means is that we are pulling some voters off the bench.
Listen, we got this one person from Georgia, Karen Thummer. I can't say your last name. I'm sorry. It says Georgia here just early voted and took 3 first-time voters with me. We all voted Republican.
Yeah.
So see, like this, it's happening. This is awesome. Thank you.
Well,
Way to go.
And I'll
Good
say
job.
this too. There's been a lot of people. I'm actually doing a call tomorrow. There's been a lot of people that are very, very, very skeptical of early voting, and I get it. It's because Republicans don't believe that it should be election month, right? We believe in election day, and for good reason. The problem is that, again, when the rules change, you have to adapt your strategy in order to accommodate. If you don't, you lose. And fortunately, we've had a lot of people that to some degree were really, really skeptical of early voting, wanted to refuse to do it. And some of them we finally convinced that no, it's not a bad thing to do if that's what the rules are. And then what it also does is it has given us the ability, along with some other things that we don't potentially like some of the mail-in ballots and things like that, but to get more people engaged and to show them that, okay, yeah, hey, it's been made easier for you to vote, so please do it.
So again, 4 out of 4, that doesn't matter in early voting because those people will show up on election day if they don't vote early. Yeah. It's these other groups that matter. And again, we're just much more competitive than we have historically. This is not going to be – Virginia's not the only state voting on election day, though. There's 50 states. Yeah. It's a presidential year. So what's happening here is not happening in a vacuum. And this brings me actually to some data points here. This is Pennsylvania historical stuff here. So this was actually compiled. I have the same thing, but this is actually being compiled in a nice, pretty colorful format. Mine is much uglier. So I'm actually showing another person's from Twitter. This guy's account, Michael Pruser. This guy gets credit for it. So go follow him. He's a great data analyst. I agree with a lot of his takes, and he actually has this sheet here. I won't show my Pennsylvania sheet because it's just internal, much uglier. Yeah. And what he shows here, this is in Pennsylvania. It's broken down by county. And these are vote by mail returns. These are vote by mail requests. So Pennsylvania has early voting as well going on right now. We've got a friend of ours, Cliff Maloney, that's actually leading the Pennsylvania chase right now, where he's trying to track down these ballots and chase them and get them in before Election Day, because we know we're going to win the Election Day vote. But if Democrats swamp us in the early vote, we're still going to lose. So we're trying to keep even with them.
Can we go back to the Twitter on this? Unless you want to show us something with this. That's a very impressive wall of Excel spreadsheet.
I'm showing you something.
Okay, show us.
Okay, so here's the requests. He's been tracking it by day. And as of the 15th, which is the day that we're recording, Democrats are just over 1 million requests. Republicans are almost at 500,000 requests. Here's the returns that have been tracking as well, right? We're at 130,000 returns. They're at 358,000 returns. So currently they've banked, 200 and something thousand votes right now. But look at the rate, though. We are on the verge of getting 27%. Cliff Maloney told me 6 months ago that if we get over 27% in Pennsylvania in early voting, we are more likely than not to win this state. Mm-hmm. And if we can get it to 33%, we're absolutely guaranteed to win the state. So this is the type of stuff that we need to be tracking. And currently, look at the trend here. The trend has been improving for us. So the point is that, and here's there's a tweet thread from him that explains all of this. And here's what Pruser has to say. This is the update as of this morning. Net change in voter registration, we've gained 22,000 over the last week. They've gained 9,000. Again, we're outpacing them in party registration. Registration wraps up in about a week from now in Pennsylvania for this presidential election. He goes on to say, Republicans increased registration margins again this week and are doing a good job of matching Democrats on the ballot requests day over day. We're at the point in the process where, on the return side, the margin will only get tighter every day until Election Day. With Allegheny, that's Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Montgomery, that's the collar counties around Philly. And all three of those counties are super blue. With Allegheny, Philadelphia, and Montgomery reporting returns well over the state average and more than a dozen Republican counties yet to even start counting, the trend will only go one way from here on out. What currently represents a return advantage for Democrats of D plus 42.64% will likely end in the mid to high 20s. This is not, he meant to say this is not 2020, and this is certainly not 2022. Mm-hmm. There was just a typo there at the end. But point is that Pennsylvania is going to keep getting redder between now and Election Day. The question is it going to get red enough for us to flip it? Pruser thinks it's a total coin toss, and he probably won't make a prediction until a week or two from now. Yeah, I think that where we're at is favorable enough that what we were talking about with the problem that they have in Philadelphia, getting their own base out to vote. There's a huge issue with Hispanic and black men, and let's be honest, young white men as well, that are openly revolting against the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has made too many enemies at this point, and their appeal to the awfuls, they have alienated everybody else in this country, basically. And I think that, gun to my head, I still think that Trump is going to narrowly flip Pennsylvania. And if he flips Georgia and holds the other swing states, that's the ball game right there. He can afford to lose Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan. If he holds North Carolina and he flips Georgia and Pennsylvania, it's over. Mm-hmm. And
so basically, we know the other thing that's interesting about this is, obviously polls close in Pennsylvania a lot quicker than they close in, Nevada and Arizona and everywhere else. And so you're actually looking at an area where if Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia all go for Trump, like if that's something that we can reasonably know by 11 p.m. on election night, then you've pretty much got your answer that he's won.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you heard it here first.
I will say though, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to take about 1 or 2 days for us to actually know who wins Pennsylvania, because there's a lot of mail-in vote that will have to be counted.
This is another thing that
delayed ballots.
Yeah, it's another thing that just really, really frustrates me about this. Like with the mail-in votes, you would think if you're already holding all the votes and you've got the stuff that you need in order to count them, that can be. It just, I find it very, very frustrating that it always takes the longest for the mail-in votes to come in.
I feel like on election day they should start by counting those while they're waiting for all the other returns to come in.
Yeah, it's always been frustrating. This is another thing that again, look, reasonable people can disagree to the respect that voter fraud and things like that impact elections, but they always seem to impact them in the same direction. And that's the part where people start getting really frustrated.
Look, I know that unfortunately for the data nerds in the chat, Nick and Tina took way too long fawning over JD Vance for us to go into super detail on all of these swing states. We only really covered two.
That's why you got to follow Christian on Twitter.
No. This is why we need to do a whole nother podcast right before the election where we just go through every state one by one, all the 7 swing states, and we just do a deeper dive into it.
That's fine. Let's do that.
But
I think that's a good idea.
I will say because you did present a question though at the start. By the way,
we should do this right
I just want the audience to know, because sometimes they bring up, they're like, why are you being so mean? Nick, why are you being so mean to Christian? Christian, why are you being so mean to Nick?
Because I don't like him.
We're teasing each other because we're like best friends. I'm not actually mad that he talked about JD Vance. In fact, I learned some stuff today because I didn't get to see the debate and stuff like that. So I appreciate that. But the point is that, I wasn't able to talk in depth about Arizona or Nevada or anything like that. But I will say, at least right now, and it could change until we actually do one right before the election, hopefully. But right now, I feel like, gun to my head, if I had to
yes, gun to your head, caveats complete.
I think Trump wins every swing state other than Nevada and maybe one of the
Michigan or Wisconsin.
Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania. I do think at the moment, I think he wins 2 out of the 3, potentially all 3 of them, but I think he wins 2 out of the 3. I just don't know which one.
Okay.
It's, believe it or not, in some ways, it's actually potentially more likely that he loses Pennsylvania than Michigan at this point, which is not something that I think people were expecting until recently.
No, I certainly wasn't,
Because the demographics in Michigan, I think, are more favorable to Trump's coalition than Pennsylvania, slightly so. But I think Nevada's constantly like this white whale. It's our Moby Dick. And it's going to be really, really, really close.
Yeah.
But and who knows, he might win it, but again, just to be a little bit conservative, I know I'm predicting a Trump sweep here, so that's not really conservative, but from what I'm seeing with where the polling is and stuff like that, and the trend with party registration and ballot returns and stuff like that, I have a feeling that look, if you get even just a mild polling error in Trump's favor, and this has happened twice now, I don't think it's going to be as large as 2020 or as 2016, but if it's even just a little bit, he flips every single one of these swing states. I have a feeling he's not going to flip all of them. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes short in 1 or 2 or maybe 3, but I still think that the betting market here is not that far off. Not that he's going to get, understand, he's not going to get 57%. This is likelihood to win.
Yeah.
Right? I do think that I would rather be in his position right now as we're entering the closing stretch than in her position.
Okay, I'm going to make this I'm going to make this real simple for the audience. I'm going to list a state. You say gun to your head. All right, we've done all the caveats. Gun to your head. You tell me Trump or Harris. Ready? Here's how we're going to go. Pennsylvania.
Trump.
North Carolina.
Trump.
Georgia.
Trump.
Michigan. Gun to your head. 3, 2, 1.
Trump.
Wisconsin.
Trump.
Nevada.
Harris.
Arizona.
Trump.
Popular vote.
Harris plus 1 or 1.5.
Okay.
So you're saying Trump's winning?
Yes, I do think he's going to win.
I agree with that.
At least at the moment.
Okay. Do you agree with all those states?
Yeah,
right.
I pretty much agree. The one thing I do want to say is I'm not basing, like, I look at things sort of all together.
She picks her teams by the colors of the jersey.
Oh my gosh.
I'm kidding, baby. I'm kidding.
All right. No. What it is I watch the trends and I watch where things are going up or going down. And I said before, I thought that Kamala Harris had peaked out and we would never see her go as high as where she was right after her surge again. And I've been right so far. And we see her starting to slide. And I think, barring some wild, outlandish thing on the Trump, some discovery on Trump's side, and which is kind of hard to believe something like that would happen because they've combed through everything.
Yeah, they've gone after everywhere they can.
And they've done as much as they can to conceal the other side. So I think we're at a point where it's much more likely that there's an October surprise on the Harris side than there is on the Trump side because they've been searching for 8 years on Trump. And they haven't been able to get, everything ends up just sliding off because they're all fake. And so I think if there's an October surprise, it will be on the Harris side and it will just tank her even further. I see Harris sliding even more than she is now. And I see people getting less excited about Harris even more so than now. And so I don't think we've seen the floor on Harris yet. That's what I mean. I think Trump has not quite peaked just yet. And so I'm right there with Christian. I feel super optimistic about this election. I would even not be terribly surprised if he won the popular vote.
All right.
Tina's not that far off. I mean, she was talking about the trend line. Look at this. Harris surged, right? And then she peaks, kind of 3 times, right?
Right there. I said it right after the debate, which she peaked right after that debate.
The beginning of October, and it has been. And I said
we're not going to see her.
She's been slowly slipping ever since.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna give you my prediction here real quick. We do need to go over some of these infographics, but I think he wins Pennsylvania. I think he wins Georgia, North Carolina. I think he wins Wisconsin and Michigan. Michigan is the one where Michigan is the one I have the hardest time with, even though I understand the polls are going a particular direction. So my less than optimistic is he loses Michigan. I think he loses Nevada, although I think it's going to be significantly closer this time, and I think he wins Arizona. I'm actually going to predict I think he wins the popular vote by 0.02%. 0.02.
Well, I didn't give a percentage on it, but I think he might win.
0.02 is where he does that. Now,
I'm just super optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. I balance my optimism with my frustration with the electorate and everything else. Here's what I do want to do though. I wanted real quick. We had somebody again. I mentioned this at the very beginning. I want to bring some of these out because I think they're actually really good resources. I'm probably going to be putting them out on Twitter as well. But this is from John's Essentialia. This is Substack. It's johnsutz.substack.com. So that's JONSUTZ.substack.com. And he's got these in a different order than I actually put them up here. But one of the things that he was doing was he was kind of fact checking the fact checkers as well, because there was all these claims that were made about, Biden-Harris had the most job growth, had lower crime, had all this stuff until you actually look at the statistics a little bit more. And so what he did is he actually looked at the Trump-Pence administration and then Biden-Harris. And we just kind of went through on a number of things. So the price of eggs dropped under Trump, but increased 218% under Biden-Harris, right? And you see where, when they took office, it was $1.60 for the price of eggs, then it was $1.47, and then it was $3.20 under Biden-Harris. I remember doing a funny reel about, there was this trend going around on Instagram that says, show me you're rich, or tell me you're rich without telling me you're rich. And I was on my front porch. I said, "Oh, you mean like this?" And I lifted up a big thing of eggs because all of our chickens were really producing at that point. And
that was when eggs were way more than 3.2 per dozen. I mean, I remember going and seeing them get as high as like $7 a dozen.
Yeah.
Which and that, I mean, that ended pretty quick. It was only like that for probably a month or two, maybe 3.
Yeah.
But I remember it doing that. So the $3.20, that's after it's leveled back out.
Well, and what you're going to see too on all of this is he does a really good, like he doesn't just create an infographic. Scroll down real quick. I want people to see like everything he's looking at in order to come to these prices, whether it's, stuff from the Federal Reserve, his analysis, talking about all of it, because again, it's easy to just throw stuff up there without taking into consideration, other components. But he actually talks about this. He has a funny meme over here. He's also talking about raise it up a little bit, where it's like she voted to raise taxes on rich property owners, doesn't understand why her rent was raised. It's, so some stuff like that. And previous 2024. Okay, so go to the next one. So that one was eggs. The next one we got here is car loan interest rates were stable but jumped 67% under Biden-Harris. So it was 4.6 and when they took office, 4.9 when they left. So there's a little bit of increase, but overall fairly stable. And there's many things that can account for fluctuations, but like up to 8.2. So again, up 67% on things like car loans. Next one. Price of gasoline, $2.46 when they took office, $2.42 when they left off. Can I say something else here that's important for people to understand? When you can actually, when prices can remain fairly stable consistently over a long period of time, it actually makes predictive analysis so much easier when it comes from everything to you planning your family budget to a business planning what they're going to do, what they're going to invest in and whatnot. So that stability of prices is really important. And then price of gasoline up 38% under Biden-Harris. Next infographic.
Same thing with diesel. It was up 33%.
Yeah, diesel up 33%. Price of electricity, 134 when Trump then took office, went up to 136 by the time, but now it's up. So up 30% under Biden-Harris. This is another one of those components whenever they ask Trump. I'm going to be honest right here, all right? I'm just going to be very, very transparent with everybody. There are things I'm frustrated with Trump on, and one of it was money printer go burr. Now, I used to wonder why aren't the media hitting him more on the fact that there was so much money printed during COVID. I'll tell you why. It's because the Democrats wanted even more printed. So
it's the only thing they liked about him.
It's not even something they can critique him on because they don't think he did it enough. But the other thing that he always talks about with lowering inflation is cost of energy. And he's right in the sense that when you have a general increase of prices, there's very, very few things that can actually cause a general increase in prices across the board. But energy costs are one of them because just about everything relies on energy from the standpoint of either electricity, diesel, gasoline. So when those factors of production go up significantly, it impacts the price of everything in a way that other things just don't. So next one. Okay, manufacturing jobs. So again, there was a fact check one. Donald Trump's policies destroyed manufacturing jobs, reversing Obama's booming economy. And then he actually looks at it, and it's like, well, no, under Obama from 2009 to 2017, we went from 12.56 million manufacturing jobs to 12.37 million. But under Trump, we actually increased to 12.78 million. The only part that obviously when you had COVID, there was you had unemployment across the board, which you can't really blame Trump for COVID, and you certainly can't blame him for the policies that individual governors took within their states. But again, overall under Obama, what this infographic is showing is that we lost about 190,000 manufacturing jobs and gained about 441,000 under Trump. Next one. This one is interesting. Black and Hispanic unemployment under Trump dropped significantly. So black unemployment dropped by 23%. Hispanic unemployment dropped by 35%. I think this is another area too, because obviously this isn't all men. This is men and women covered under this feature. But I think this is another area too where the Democrats are having a huge problem with men, because not only have they alienated them, but one of the worst things you can do to men culturally is when they can't find jobs. That impacts everybody on an economic standpoint. I think that men get a great deal of a sense of identity through their job, and when they're unemployed, I think there's a whole nother level of frustration there. And then we have home ownership dropped to a 50-year low under Obama, but grew 7.9% under Trump. And then the final one we have here is, the Biden-Harris administration is the number one cash enabler of the Iranian terrorist regime. So a lot of the stuff that you see going on in the Middle East that's got everybody concerned right now has to do with the foreign policy implications, because a lot of what they're doing is not just the domestic problems that have been created, but actually fostering greater instability in the world in such a way. And the Bush administration bears responsibility for destabilizing security in the Middle East. But again, Harris-Biden decided to double down on it with respect to how they pulled out of Afghanistan, the amount of money that they've made available to the Iranian regime, which is really dealing with internal problems in such a way that could prevent them from donating a bunch of money to terrorism, except that Harris and Biden keep throwing them lifelines because they have this foolish idea that, well, if we just give terrorist regimes more money, they'll like us and realize we're not such bad people. That's not how this works. But overall, I would really, again, I encourage you to go look at this, johnsutz.substack.com. That's JONSUTZ.substack.com. I just thought these infographics were really useful. Like I said, we'll probably be putting them out on Twitter and other places as well. But all of that to say, it is the broad consensus of everyone at this table that if trends continue the way that they currently are, caveat, it looks like two of us think Trump wins the Electoral College fairly soundly.
Did Hamilton give his prediction?
Oh, gosh dang. I'm so used to
totally
you.
neglected
I did.
the good
I
Hamilton.
neglected the good Hamilton. Good Hamilton. I'm going to list a state. You list whether Trump wins it or not. Ready?
Okay.
Pennsylvania.
Wins.
North Carolina.
Wins.
Better win your home state. If he doesn't win North Carolina, this is on you.
That'd be tough.
You'll be the bad Hamilton then.
Yeah.
So I hope you're ready for that. All right. Georgia.
Wins.
Michigan.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Wisconsin.
Wins Wisconsin.
Okay. Nevada.
Loses.
Arizona.
Loses.
Popular vote.
Harris.
All right. So Hamilton is the most pessimistic out of all of us. He thinks Trump loses Arizona as well.
Yeah.
All righty.
And I don't have nearly the context data wise, but that's where I'm at right now. I feel like there are a lot of people who could potentially go Trump that have never voted for Trump before. So I personally feel like it's still a toss up, but
all right.
Don't have all the data. I do too. I definitely think it's still a toss up.
A lot can happen between now and then.
I'm fairly confident at this point. I'm never like so confident that it's like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, no, you better vote. Like, I'm confident insofar as people remain motivated to vote on our side, which they apparently seem to be.
As long as the trends continue.
Alrighty, so let me go ahead and wrap all of this up. First of all, thank you all for watching. I know we had a little bit of a long episode here, but we wanted to get into some of the numbers, some of the data, and also show you stuff that most people are not seeing, most people are not tracking, and certainly, you know, it's not like mainstream media is doing a lot of in-depth analysis of some of these numbers. Christian's mad at me because we didn't do more into numbers. Christian just wanted to flood you with Excel spreadsheets, baby.
I think we could do one for numbers right before the election. Thursday before the election.
No. I think it's even more than that. I think we need to be looking at something either on election day or maybe early that morning where we're making predictions before polls close.
I think Christian has to be in Pennsylvania for that.
He probably does, but here's what I want. I want an episode where there's no more excuses. It's election day. Polls are open, but they haven't closed. You got all the data.
No caveats.
No caveats. You get to say definitively on that day. If that's the sort of thing you'd like to see us do, please let us know. Would you like us to do an election day, election night live coverage?
Because everyone's going to say no.
Whatever Christian says that close to election, the day before or the day of, whatever he says, I would literally put money on it. I would
but how
bet
much?
on
$1?
his
What are you putting
prediction.
on it? What are you putting on it?
No, I'm just saying I'm not a bettor, but
all right.
But I'm saying Christian's predictions when he's that close to an election are so accurate, it's uncanny.
All right, we're seeing Yes do the election day video. All right, make it happen, Hamilton. Since Hamilton's the one that makes everything. Hamilton and Nate, producer Nate, are the ones that make everything happen around here when it comes to a technological perspective.
Sometimes it's a challenge, like today.
Yeah, today was hey, thank you again to everyone that waited for that half hour. I'm sorry it took us a while to get kicked off, but we're trying to improve some of our equipment. We had
I will say, even with all the issues and even with us running long, like we had a lot of people that tuned in live today, and I think that there's going to be a lot of excitement behind this episode once it goes out as well, because people are tuning in to the election and they're starting to pay attention in a really big way. And I mean, everything that I'm seeing on the internet a month ago, it wasn't like this,
Everyone
but now
wants
it's
the
like
data.
everybody's starting to focus on stuff.
Yeah,
so.
we'll do another one. We'll kind of figure out what we got to do because some of us are going to be in different. I don't think we're going to all be in the same place on election day. It's possible we might be. We'll see what happens. If we are, it might be a little bit more difficult for us to set something up because we will not be in this studio. But we will do whatever we can to try to make that happen for you if there is a desire. Maybe we'll put out a poll. Maybe, you know what we'll do? Maybe we'll put a poll on Circle.
I'm pretty sure I can predict what that poll's
If you want to go, in fact, if you want to vote on this, go look at the link in the description. You'll see our community. It's called our Circle community. That's where you can go. We actually get a lot of input on episodes, on what people want to see. We're going to be doing some other very exciting things with that community starting in November. So now would be a great time to join that Circle community and kind of get used to how it works in there right before we make some pretty significant improvements, as well as some additional features, which I'm not going to tell you about now. Anyways, thank you very much for joining us. You heard it here first on who's going to win and why and where. And then you get to check back in with us to see if any of this was right. Is the Oracle of Virginia still an oracle which can be trusted? Or is it nothing more than, I don't know, some chick standing over a fissure in Greece, taking up a bunch of fumes and just spilling out nonsense in the hope that it's right? You will see on November 5th. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. That's the Oracle of Delphi, if anybody's confused on what I'm talking about. All right, thank you very much, and we will see you next episode.